Chapter 16. The ceremony goes as usual. I lie on my back, fully clothed except for the healthy white cotton underdrawers. What I could see, if I were to open my eyes, would be the large white canopy of Serena Joy's outsized colonial-style four-poster bed, suspended like a sagging cloud above us, a cloud sprigged with tiny drops of silver rain, which, if you looked at them closely, would turn out to be four-petaled flowers. I would not see the carpet, which is white, or the sprigged curtains and skirted dressing table with its silver-backed brush and mirror set. Only the canopy, which manages to suggest at one and the same time, by the gauziness of its fabric and its heavy downward curve, both ethereality and matter. Or the sail of a ship. Big-bellied sails, they used to say in poems. Bellying. Propelled forward by a swollen belly. A mist of lily of the valley surrounds us. Chilly, crisp almost. It's not warm in this room. Above me, towards the head of the bed, Serena Joy is arranged, outspread. Her legs are apart. I lie between them, my head on her stomach, her pubic bone under the base of my skull, her thighs on either side of me. She too is fully clothed. My arms are raised. She holds my hands, each of mine in each of hers. This is supposed to signify that we are one flesh, one being. What it really means is that she is in control of the process and thus of the product. If any, the rings of her left hand cut into my fingers. It may or may not be revenge. My red skirt is hitched up to my waist, though no higher. Below it the commander is fucking. What he is fucking is the lower part of my body. I do not say making love, because this is not what he's doing. Copulating two would be inaccurate because it would imply two people and only one is involved. Nor does rape cover it. Nothing is going on here that I haven't signed up for. There wasn't a lot of choice, but there was some, and this is what I chose. Therefore I lie still and picture the unseen canopy over my head. I remember Queen Victoria's advice to her daughter. Close your eyes and think of England. But this is not England. I wish he would hurry up. Maybe I'm crazy and this is some new kind of therapy. I wish it were true. Then I could get better and this would go away. Serena Joy grips my hands as if it is she, not I, who's being fucked, as if she finds it either pleasurable or painful, and the commander fucks with a regular 2-4 marching stroke, on and on like a tap dripping. He is preoccupied, like a man humming to himself in the shower without knowing he's humming. Like a man who has other things on his mind. It's as if he's somewhere else, waiting for himself to come, drumming his fingers on the table while he waits. There's an impatience in his rhythm now. But isn't this everyone's wet dream? Two women at once? They used to say that. Exciting, they used to say. What's going on in this room, under Serena Joy's silvery canopy, is not exciting. It has nothing to do with passion or love or romance or any of those other notions we used to titillate ourselves with. It has nothing to do with sexual desire, at least for me, and certainly not for Serena. Arousal and orgasm are no longer thought necessary. They would be a symptom of frivolity merely, like jazz garters or beauty spots. Superfluous distractions for the light-minded. Outdated. It seems odd that women once spent such time and energy reading about such things, thinking about them, worrying about them, writing about them. They are so obviously recreational. This is not recreation even for the commander. This is serious business. The commander, too, is doing his duty. If I were to open my eyes a slit, I would be able to see him, his not unpleasant face hanging over my torso, with a few strands of his silver hair falling perhaps over his forehead, intent on his inner journey, that place he is hurrying towards, which recedes as in a dream at the same speed with which he approaches it. I would see his open eyes. If he were better looking, would I enjoy this more? At least he's an improvement on the previous one, who smelled like a church cloakroom in the rain. Like your mouth when the dentist starts picking at your teeth. Like a nostril. The commander, instead, smells of mothballs, Or is this odor some punitive form of aftershave? Why does he have to wear that stupid uniform? But would I like his white, tufted raw body any better? Kissing is forbidden between us. This makes it bearable. One detaches oneself. One describes. He comes at last, with a stifled groan as of relief. Serena Joy, who has been holding her breath, expels it. The commander, who has been propping himself on his elbows, away from our combined bodies, doesn't permit himself to sink down into us. He rests a moment, withdraws, recedes, rezippers. He nods, then turns and leaves the room, closing the door with exaggerated care behind him, as if both of us are his ailing mother. There's something hilarious about this, but I don't dare laugh. Serena Joy lets go of my hands. You can get up now, she says. Get up and get out. She's supposed to have me rest for 10 minutes with my feet on a pillow to improve the chances. This is meant to be a time of silent meditation for her, but she's not in the mood for that. There is loathing in her voice, as if the touch of my flesh sickens and contaminates her. I untangle myself from her body, stand up. The juice of the commander runs down my legs. Before I turn away, I see her straighten her blue skirt, clench her legs together. She continues lying on the bed, gazing up at the canopy above her, stiff and straight as an effigy. Which of us is it worse for, her or me? Chapter 17. This is what I do when I'm back in my room. I take off my clothes and put on my nightgown. I look for the pat of butter in the toe of my right shoe, where I hid it after dinner. The cupboard was too warm. The butter is semi-liquid. Much of it has sunk into the paper napkin I wrapped it in. Now I'll have butter in my shoe. Not the first time, because whenever there is butter or even margarine, I save some in this way. I can get most of the butter off the shoe lining with a washcloth or some toilet paper from the bathroom tomorrow. I rub the butter over my face, work it into the skin of my hands. There's no longer any hand lotion or face cream. Not for us. Such things are considered vanities. We are containers. It's only the insides of our bodies that are important. The outside can become hard and wrinkled, for all they care, like the shell of a nut. This was a decree of the wives, this absence of hand lotion. They don't want us to look attractive. For them, things are bad enough as it is. The butter is a trick I learned at the Rachel and Leah Center. The Red Center, we called it, because there was so much red. My predecessor in this room, my friend with the freckles and the good laugh, must have done this too, this buttering. We all do it. As long as we do this, butter our skin to keep it soft, we can believe that we will someday get out, that we will be touched again in love or desire. We have ceremonies of our own, private ones. The butter is greasy and it will go rancid and I will smell like an old cheese. But at least it's organic, as they used to say. To such devices have we descended. Buttered. I lie on my single bed, flat, like a piece of toast. I can't sleep. In the semi-dark, I stare up at the blind plaster eye in the middle of the ceiling, which stares back down at me, even though it can't see. There's no breeze. My white curtains are like gauze bandages, hanging limp, glimmering in the aura cast by the searchlight that illuminates this house at night. Or is there a moon? I fold back the sheet, get carefully up on silent bare feet. In my nightgown, go to the window like a child. I want to see the moon on the breast of the new fallen snow. The sky is clear but hard to make out because of the searchlight. But yes, in the obscured sky a moon does float, newly, a wishing moon, a sliver of ancient rock, a goddess, a wink. The moon is a stone and the sky is full of deadly hardware. But oh God, how beautiful anyway. I want Luke here so badly. I want to be held and told my name. I want to be valued in ways that I am not. I want to be more than valuable. I repeat my former name, remind myself of what I once could do, how others saw me. I want to steal something. In the hall the nightlight's on. The long space glows gently pink. I walk, one foot set carefully down, then the other without creaking, along the runner, as if on a forest floor, sneaking, my heart quick, through the night house. I am out of place. This is entirely illegal. Down past the fisheye on the hall wall, I can see my white shape of tented body, hair down my back like a mane, my eyes gleaming. I like this. I am doing something on my own. The active tensed. What I would like to steal is a knife from the kitchen, but I'm not ready for that. I reach the sitting room, doors ajar, slip in, leave the door a little open. A squeak of wood, but who's near enough to hear? I stand in the room, letting the pupils of my eyes dilate, like a cat's or owl's. Old perfume, cloth dust fill my nostrils. There's a slight mist of light coming through the cracks around the closed drapes. From the searchlight outside, where two men doubtless patrol, I've seen them from above, from behind my curtains, dark shapes, cutouts. Now I can see outlines, gleams. From the mirror, the bases of the lamps, the vases, the sofa looming like a cloud at dusk. What should I take? Something that will not be missed. In the wood at midnight, a magic flower. A withered daffodil, not one from the dried arrangement. The daffodils will soon be thrown out. They're beginning to smell. Along with Serena's stale fumes, the stench of her knitting. I grope, find an end table, feel. There's a clink. I must have knocked something. I find the daffodils, crisp at the edges where they've dried. Limp towards the stems, use my fingers to pinch. I will press this somewhere, under the mattress. Leave it there, for the next woman, the one who comes after me, to find. But there's someone in the room behind me. I hear the step, quiet as mine, the creaking of the same floorboard. The door closes behind me with a little click, cutting the light. I freeze. White was a mistake. I'm snow in moonlight, even in the dark. Then a whisper, don't scream. It's all right, as if I'd scream as if it's all right. I turn. A shape, that's all, dull glint of cheekbone, devoid of color. He steps towards me. Nick, what are you doing in here? I don't answer. He too is illegal. Here with me he can't give me away. Nor I him. For the moment we're mirrors. He puts his hand on my arm, pulls me against him, his mouth on mine. What else comes from such denial? Without a word. Both of us shaking. How I'd like to. In Serena's parlor, with the dried flowers, on the Chinese carpet, his thin body. A man entirely unknown. It would be like shouting, it would be like shooting someone. My hand goes down. How about that? I could unbutton and then. But it's too dangerous. He knows it. We push each other away, not far. Too much trust, too much risk, too much already. I was coming to find you, he says, breathes, almost into my ear. I want to reach up, taste his skin. He makes me hungry. His fingers move, feeling my arm under the nightgown sleeve, as if his hand won't listen to reason. It's so good to be touched by someone, to be felt so greedily, to feel so greedy. Luke, you'd know, you'd understand. It's you here in another body. Bullshit. Why? I say. Is it so bad for him that he'd take the risk of coming to my room at night? I think of the hanged men hooked on the wall. I can hardly stand up. I have to get away, back to the stairs, before I dissolve entirely. His hands on my shoulder now, held still, heavy, pressing down on me like warm lead. Is this what I would die for? I'm a coward. I hate the thought of pain. He told me to. Nick says. He wants to see you. In his office. What do you mean? I say. The commander, it must be. See me? What does he mean by see? Hasn't he had enough of me? Tomorrow, he says, just audible. In the dark parlor we move away from each other, slowly, as if pulled towards each other by a force, current, pulled apart also by hands equally strong. I find the door, turn the knob, fingers on cool porcelain, open. It's all I can do. 7. Night. Chapter 18. I lie in bed, still trembling. You can wet the rim of a glass and run your finger around the rim and it will make a sound. This is what I feel like. This sound of glass. I feel like the word shatter. I want to be with someone. Lying in bed, with Luke, his hand on my rounded belly. The three of us in bed. She kicking, turning over within me. Thunderstorm outside the window. That's why she's awake. They can hear. They sleep. They can be startled. Even there in the soothing of the heart. Like waves on the shore around them. A flash of lightning. Quite close. Luke's eyes go white for an instant. I'm not frightened. We're wide awake. The rain hits now, we will be slow and careful. If I thought this would never happen again, I would die. But this is wrong, nobody dies from lack of sex. It's lack of love we die from. There's nobody here I can love. All the people I could love are dead or elsewhere. Who knows where they are or what their names are now? They might as well be nowhere as I am for them. I too am a missing person. From time to time I can see their faces, against the dark, flickering like the images of saints, in old foreign cathedrals, in the light of the drafty candles. Candles you would light to pray by, kneeling, your forehead against the wooden railing, hoping for an answer. I can conjure them, but they are mirages only. They don't last. Can I be blamed for wanting a real body to put my arms around? Without it, I too am disembodied. I can listen to my own heartbeat against the bed springs. I can stroke myself under the dry white sheets, in the dark. But I too am dry and white, hard, granular. It's like running my hand over a plate full of dried rice. It's like snow. There's something dead about it, something deserted. I am like a room where things once happened and now nothing does. Except the pollen of the weeds that grow up outside the window, blowing in as dust across the floor. Here is what I believe. I believe Luke is lying face down in a thicket, a tangle of bracken, the brown fronds from last year under the green ones just unrolled, or ground hemlock perhaps, although it's too early for the red berries. What is left of him? His hair, the bones, the plaid wool shirt, green and black, the leather belt, the work boots. I know exactly what he was wearing. I can see his clothes in my mind, bright as a lithograph or a full-color advertisement, from an ancient magazine, though not his face, not so well. His face is beginning to fade, possibly because it wasn't always the same. His face had different expressions, his clothes did not. I pray that the hole, or two or three, there was more than one shot, they were close together. I pray that at least one hole is neatly, quickly, and finally through the skull, through the place where all the pictures were, so that there would have been only the one flash of darkness or pain, dull I hope, like the word thud, only the one and then silence. I believe this. I also believe that Luke is sitting up, in a rectangle somewhere, gray cement on a ledge or the edge of something, a bed or chair. God knows what he's wearing. God knows what they've put him in. God isn't the only one who knows, so maybe there could be some way of finding out. He hasn't shaved for a year, though they cut his hair short whenever they feel like it. For lice, they say. I'll have to revise that. If they cut the hair for lice, they'd cut the beard too. You'd think. Anyway, they don't do it well. The hair is ragged. The back of his neck is nicked. That's hardly the worst. He looks 10 years older, 20. He's bent like an old man. His eyes are pouched, small purple veins have burst in his cheeks. There's a scar. No, a wound. It isn't yet healed. The color of tulips, near the stem end, down the left side of his face where the flesh split recently. The body is so easily damaged, so easily disposed of, water and chemicals is all it is, hardly more to it than a jellyfish drying on sand. He finds it painful to move his hands, painful to move. He doesn't know what he's accused of. Problem. There must be something, some accusation. Otherwise, why are they keeping him? Why isn't he already dead? He must know something they want to know. I can't imagine. I can't imagine he hasn't already said whatever it is. I would. He is surrounded by a smell, his own, the smell of a cooped-up animal in a dirty cage. I imagine him resting because I can't bear to imagine him at any other time, just as I can't imagine anything below his collar, above his cuffs. I don't want to think what they've done to his body. Does he have shoes? No, and the floor is cold and wet. Does he know I'm here, alive, that I'm thinking about him? I have to believe so. In reduced circumstances, you have to believe all kinds of things. I believe in thought transference now, vibrations in the ether, that sort of junk. I never used to. I also believe that they didn't catch him or catch up with him after all, that he made it, reached the bank, swam the river, crossed the border, dragged himself up on the far shore, an island, teeth chattering. Found his way to a nearby farmhouse, was allowed in with suspicion at first, but then when they understood who he was, they were friendly. Not the sort who would turn him in, perhaps they were Quakers, they will smuggle him inland, from house to house. The woman made him some hot coffee, and gave him a set of her husband's clothes. I picture the clothes. Comforts me to dress him warmly. He made contact with the others. There must be a resistance, a government in exile. Someone must be out there, taking care of things. I believe in the resistance as I believe there can be no light without shadow. Or rather, no shadow unless there is also light. There must be a resistance, or where do all the criminals come from, on the television? Any day now there may be a message from him. It will come in the most unexpected way, from the least likely person, someone I never would have suspected. Under my plate on the dinner tray, slipped into my hand as I reach the tokens across the counter in all flesh. The message will say that I must have patience. Sooner or later he will get me out, we will find her, wherever they've put her. She'll remember us and we will be all three of us together. Meanwhile I must endure, keep myself safe for later. What has happened to me? What's happening to me now won't make any difference to him. He loves me anyway. He knows it isn't my fault. The message will say that also. It's this message, which may never arrive, that keeps me alive. I believe in the message. The things I believed can't all be true, though one of them must be. But I believe in all of them, all three versions of Luke at one and the same time. This contradictory way of believing seems to me, right now, the only way I can believe anything. Whatever the truth is, I will be ready for it. This also is a belief of mine. This also may be untrue. One of the gravestones in the cemetery near the earliest church has an anchor on it and an hourglass, and the words, "In hope." In hope. Why did they put that above a dead person? Was it the corpse hoping, or those still alive? Does Luke hope? Birthday. Chapter 19. I'm dreaming that I am awake. I dream that I get out of bed and walk across the room. Not this room, and go out the door, not this door. I'm at home, one of my homes, and she's running to meet me, in her small green nightgown with the sunflower on the front, her feet bare, and I pick her up and feel her arms and legs go around me and I begin to cry, because I know then that I'm not awake. I'm back in this bed, trying to wake up, and I wake up and sit on the edge of the bed, and my mother comes in with a tray and asks me if I'm feeling better. When I was sick as a child, she had to stay home from work. But I'm not awake this time either. After these dreams I do awake, and I know I'm really awake because there is the wreath on the ceiling, and my curtains hanging like drowned white hair. I feel drugged. I consider this. Maybe they're drugging me. Maybe the life I think I'm living is a paranoid delusion. Not a hope. I know where I am, and who and what day it is. These are the tests, and I am sane. Sanity is a valuable possession. I hoard it the way people once hoarded money. I save it so I will have enough when the time comes. Grayness comes through the curtains, hazy bright, not much sun today. I get out of bed, go to the window, kneel on the window seat, the hard little cushion, faith, and look out. There is nothing to be seen. I wonder what has become of the other two cushions. There must have been 3 once. Hope and charity, where have they been stowed? Serena Joy has tidy habits. She wouldn't throw away anything not quite worn out. 1 for Rita, 1 for Cora? The bell goes, I'm up before it, ahead of time. I dress not looking down. I sit in the chair and think about the word chair. It can also mean the leader of a meeting. It can also mean a mode of execution. It is the first syllable in charity. It is the French word for flesh. None of these facts has any connection with the others. These are the kinds of litanies I use to compose myself. In front of me is a tray, and on the tray are a glass of apple juice, a vitamin pill, a spoon, a plate with 3 slices of brown toast on it, a small dish containing honey, and another plate with an egg cup on it, the kind that looks like a woman's torso in a skirt. Under the skirt is the second egg, being kept warm. The egg cup is white china with a blue stripe. The first egg is white. I move the egg cup a little, so it's now in the watery sunlight that comes through the window and falls, brightening, waning, brightening again on the tray. The shell of the egg is smooth but also grained. Small pebbles of calcium are defined by the sunlight, like craters on the moon. It's a barren landscape, yet perfect. It's the sort of desert the saints went into, so their minds would not be distracted by profusion. I think that this is what God must look like, an egg. The life of the moon may not be on the surface but inside. The egg is glowing now, as if it had an energy of its own. To look at the egg gives me intense pleasure. The sun goes and the egg fades. I pick the egg out of the cup and finger it for a moment. It's warm. Women used to carry such eggs between their breasts, to incubate them. That would have felt good. The minimalist life. Pleasure is an egg. Blessings that can be counted on the fingers of one hand. But possibly this is how I am expected to react. If I have an egg, what more can I want? In reduced circumstances, the desire to live attaches itself to strange objects. I would like a pet. A bird, say, or a cat. A familiar. Anything at all familiar. A rat would do in a pinch, but there's no chance of that. This house is too clean. I slice the top off the egg with the spoon and eat the contents. While I'm eating the second egg, I hear the siren, at a great distance at first, winding its way towards me among the large houses and clipped lawns, a thin sound like the hum of an insect, then nearing, opening out like a flower of sound opening into a trumpet. Proclamation, this siren. I put down my spoon. My heart speeds up. I go to the window again. Will it be blue and not for me? But I see it turn the corner, come along the street, stop in front of the house, still blaring, and it's red. Joy to the world, rare enough these days. I leave the second egg half-eaten, hurry to the closet for my cloak, and already I can hear feet on the stairs and the voices calling. Hurry, says Cora, won't wait all day, and she helps me on with the cloak. She's actually smiling. I almost run down the hall, the stairs are like skiing, the front door is wide. Today I can go through it, and the guardian stands there saluting. It started to rain, a drizzle, and the gravid smell of earth and grass fills the air. The red birthmobile is parked in the driveway. This back door is open and I clamber in. The carpet on the floor is red. Red curtains are drawn over the windows. There are 3 women in here already, sitting on the benches that run the length of the van on either side. The guardian closes and locks the double doors and climbs into the front, beside the driver. Through the glassed-over wire grill we can see the backs of their heads. We start with a lurch, while overhead the siren screams. Make way! Make way! Who is it? I say to the woman next to me, into her ear, or where her ear must be under the white headdress. I almost have to shout. The noise is so loud. Off Warren, she shouts back. Impulsively she grabs my hand, squeezes it, as we lurch around the corner. She turns to me and I see her face. There are tears running down her cheeks, but tears of what? Envy? Disappointment? But no, she's laughing. She throws her arms around me. I've never seen her before. She hugs me. She has large breasts, under the red habit. She wipes her sleeve across her face. On this day we can do anything we want. I revised that, within limits. Across from us on the other bench, one woman is praying, eyes closed, hands up to her mouth. Or she may not be praying. She may be biting her thumbnails. Possibly she's trying to keep calm. The third woman is calm already. She sits with her arms folded, smiling a little. The siren goes on and on. That used to be the sound of death, for ambulances or fires. Possibly it will be the sound of death today also. We will soon know. What will Offred give birth to? A baby as we all hope? Or something else, an unbaby, with a pinhead or a snout like a dog's, or two bodies, or a hole in its heart or no arms or webbed hands and feet? There's no telling. They could tell once with machines, but that is now outlawed. What would be the point of knowing, anyway? You can't have them taken out. Whatever it is must be carried to term. The chances are 1 in 4. We learned that at the center. The air got too full once of chemicals, rays, radiation, the water swarmed with toxic molecules. All of that takes years to clean up, and meanwhile they creep into your body, camp out in your fatty cells. Who knows? Your very flesh may be polluted, dirty as an oily beach, sure death to shore birds and unborn babies. Maybe a vulture would die of eating you. Maybe you light up in the dark, like an old-fashioned watch. Death watch. That's a kind of beetle, it buries carrion. I can't think of myself, my body, sometimes without seeing the skeleton. How I must appear to an electron. A cradle of life, made of bones. And within, hazards, warped proteins, bad crystals jagged as glass. Women took medicines, pills, men sprayed trees, cows ate grass. All that souped-up piss flowed into the rivers. Not to mention the exploding atomic power plants along the San Andreas Fault, nobody's fault, during the earthquakes, and the mutant strain of syphilis no mold could touch. Some did it themselves, had themselves tied shut with catgut or scarred with chemicals. How could they, said Aunt Lydia, oh, how could they have done such a thing? Jezebels, scorning God's gifts, wringing her hands. It's a risk you're taking, said Aunt Lydia. But you are the shock troops. You will march out in advance, into dangerous territory. The greater the risk, the greater the glory. She clasped her hands, radiant with our phony courage. We looked down at the tops of our desks. To go through all that and give birth to a shredder. It wasn't a fine thought. We didn't know exactly what would happen to the babies that didn't get passed, that were declared unbabies. But we knew they were put somewhere, quickly, away. There was no one cause, says Aunt Lydia. She stands at the front of the room, in her khaki dress, a pointer in her hand. Pulled down in front of the blackboard, where once there would have been a map, is a graph showing the birth rate per 1,000, for years and years. A slippery slope, down past the zero line of replacement and down and down. Of course, some women believed there would be no future. They thought the world would explode. That was the excuse they used, says Aunt Lydia. They said there was no sense in breeding. Aunt Lydia's nostrils narrow. Such wickedness. They were lazy women, she says. They were sluts. On the top of my desk there are initials, carved into the wood, and dates. The initials are sometimes in 2 sets, joined by the word loves. J.H. loves BP 1954. R loves LT. These seem to me like the inscriptions I used to read about, carved on the stone walls of caves, or drawn with a mixture of soot and animal fat. They seem to me incredibly ancient. The desktop is of blonde wood. It slants down, and there is an armrest on the right side, to lean on when you were writing on paper with a pen. Inside the desk you could keep things, books, notebooks. These habits of former times appear to me now lavish, decadent almost, immoral, like the orgies of barbarian regimes. M loves G. 1972. This carving, done with a pencil dug many times into the worn varnish of the desk, has the pathos of all vanished civilizations. It's like a handprint on stone. Whoever made that was once alive. There are no dates after the mid-80s. This must have been one of the schools that was closed down then, for lack of children. They made mistakes, says Aunt Lydia. We don't intend to repeat them. Her voice is pious, condescending. The voice of those whose duty it is to tell us unpleasant things for our own good. I would like to strangle her. I shove this thought away almost as soon as I think it. A thing is valued, she says, only if it is rare and hard to get. We want you to be valued, girls. She is rich in pauses, which she savors in her mouth. Think of yourselves as pearls. We, sitting in our rows, eyes down, we make her salivate morally. We are hers to define, we must suffer her adjectives. I think about pearls. Pearls are congealed oyster spit. This is what I will tell Moira later, if I can. All of us here will lick you into shape, says Aunt Lydia with satisfied good cheer. The van stops, the back doors are opened. The guardian herds us out. At the front door stands another guardian, with one of those snubby machine guns slung over his shoulder. We file towards the front door. In the drizzle, the guardian's saluting. The big emerge van, the one with the machines and the mobile doctors, is parked farther along the circular drive. I see one of the doctors looking out the window of the van. I wonder what they do in there, waiting. Play cards, most likely, or read. Some masculine pursuit. Most of the time they aren't needed at all. They're only allowed in if it can't be helped. It used to be different, they used to be in charge. A shame it was, said Aunt Lydia. Shameful. What she just showed us was a film, made in an olden days hospital. A pregnant woman wired up to a machine, electrodes coming out of her every which way so that she looked like a broken robot, an intravenous drip feeding into her arm. Some man with a searchlight looking up between her legs, where she'd been shaved, a mere beardless girl, a tray full of bright sterilized knives, everyone with masks on, a cooperative patient. Once they drugged women, induced labor, cut them open, sewed them up. No more. No anesthetics, even. Aunt Elizabeth said it was better for the baby, but also, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. At lunch we got that, brown bread and lettuce sandwiches. As I'm going up the steps, wide steps with a stone urn on either side. Offred's commander must be higher status than ours. I hear another siren. It's the Blue Birth Mobile for wives. That will be Serena Joy, arriving in state. No benches for them, they get real seats, upholstery. They face front and are not curtained off. They know where they're going. Probably Serena Joy has been here before, to this house, for tea. Probably Offred, formerly that whiny bitch Janine, was paraded out in front of her and the other wives, so they could see her belly, feel it perhaps, and congratulate the wife. A strong girl, good muscles. No Agent Orange in her family, we checked the records, you can never be too careful. And perhaps one of the kinder ones. Would you like a cookie, dear? Oh no, you'll spoil her. Too much sugar is bad for them. Surely one won't hurt, just this once, Mildred. And sucky Janine. Oh yes, can I, ma'am, please? So well-behaved, not surly like some of them, do their job and that's that. More like a daughter to you, as you might say. One of the family. Comfortable, matronly chuckles. That's all, dear, you can go back to your room. And after she's gone. Little whores, all of them, but still, you can't be choosy. You take what they hand out, right, girls? That from the commander's wife. Oh, but you've been so lucky. Some of them, why, they aren't even clean. And won't give you a smile, mope in their rooms, don't wash their hair, the smell. I have to get the Marthas to do it, almost have to hold her down in the bathtub. You practically have to bribe her to get her to take a bath, even you have to threaten her. I had to take stern measures with mine, and now she doesn't eat her dinner properly. And as for the other thing, not a nibble, and we've been so regular. But yours, she's a credit to you. And any day now, oh, you must be so excited. She's big as a house. I bet you can hardly wait. More tea? Modestly changing the subject. I know the sort of thing that goes on. And Janine, up in her room, what does she do? Sits with the taste of sugar still in her mouth, licking her lips, stares out the window, breathes in and out, caresses her swollen breasts, thinks of nothing. Chapter 20. The central staircase is wider than ours, with a curved banister on either side. From above, I can hear the chanting of the women who are already there. We go up the stairs, single file, being careful not to step on the trailing hems of each other's dresses. To the left, the double doors to the dining room are folded back, and inside I can see the long table, covered with a white cloth and spread with a buffet. Ham, cheese, oranges, they have oranges, and fresh-baked breads and cakes. As for us, we'll get milk and sandwiches on a tray later. But they have a coffee urn and bottles of wine. For why shouldn't the wives get a little drunk on such a triumphant day? First they'll wait for the results, then they'll pig out. They're gathered in the sitting room on the other side of the stairway now, cheering on this commander's wife, the wife of Warren. A small, thin woman, she lies on the floor, in a white cotton nightgown, her graying hair spreading like mildew over the rug. They massage her tiny belly, just as if she's really about to give birth herself. The commander, of course, is nowhere in sight. He's gone wherever men go on such occasions, some hideout. Probably he's figuring out when his promotion is likely to be announced, if all goes well. He's sure to get one now. Warren is in the master bedroom, a good name for it, where this commander and his wife nightly bed down. She's sitting on their king-sized bed, propped with pillows. Janine, inflated but reduced, shorn of her former name. She's wearing a white cotton shift, which is hiked up over her thighs. Her long broom-colored hair is pulled back and tied behind her head, to keep it out of the way. Her eyes are squeezed closed, and this way I can almost like her. After all, she's one of us. What did she ever want but to lead her life as agreeably as possible? What else did any of us want? It's the possible that's the catch. She's not doing badly under the circumstances. Two women I don't know stand on either side of her, gripping her hands or she theirs. A third lifts the nightgown, pours baby oil onto her mound of stomach, rubs downwards. At her feet stands Aunt Elizabeth, in her khaki dress with the military breast pockets. She was the one who taught Joanne Ed. All I can see of her is the side of her head, her profile, but I know it's her, that jutting nose and handsome chin, severe. At her side stands the birthing stool with its double seat, the back one raised like a throne behind the other. They won't put Janine on it before it's time. The blankets stand ready, the small tub for bathing, the bowl of ice for Janine to suck. The rest of the women sit cross-legged on the rug. There's a crowd of them. Everyone in this district is supposed to be here. There must be 25, 30. Not every commander has a handmaid. Some of their wives have children. From each, says the slogan, according to her ability. To each according to his needs. We recited that 3 times after dessert. It was from the Bible, or so they said. St. Paul again in Acts. You are a transitional generation, said Aunt Lydia. It is the hardest for you. We know the sacrifices you are being expected to make. It is hard when men revile you. For the ones who come after you, it will be easier. They will accept their duties with willing hearts. She did not say, because they will have no memories of any other way. She said, because they won't want things they can't have. Once a week we had movies after lunch and before our nap. We sat on the floor of the domestic science room, on our little gray mats, and waited while Aunt Helena and Aunt Lydia struggled with the projection equipment. If we were lucky, they wouldn't get the film threaded upside down. What it reminded me of was geography classes at my own high school thousands of years before, where they showed movies of the rest of the world. Women in long skirts or cheap printed cotton dresses, carrying bundles of sticks or baskets or plastic buckets of water from some river or other, with babies slung on them in shawls or net slings, looking squint-eyed or afraid out of the screen at us, knowing something was being done to them by a machine with one glass eye but not knowing what. Those movies were comforting and faintly boring. They made me feel sleepy, even when men came onto the screen with naked muscles, hacking away at hard dirt with primitive hoes and shovels, hauling rocks. I preferred movies with dancing in them, singing, ceremonial masks, carved artifacts for making music, feathers, brass buttons, conch shells, drums. I liked watching these people when they were happy, not when they were miserable, starving, emaciated, straining themselves to death over some simple thing, the digging of a well, the irrigation of land, problems the civilized nations had long ago solved. I thought someone should just give them the technology and let them get on with it. Aunt Lydia didn't show these kinds of movies. Sometimes the movie she showed would be an old porno film from the 70s or 80s. Women kneeling, sucking penises or guns, women tied up or chained or with dog collars around their necks, women hanging from trees or upside down, naked with their legs held apart, women being raped, beaten up, killed. Once we had to watch a woman being slowly cut into pieces, her fingers and breasts snipped off with garden shears, her stomach slit open and her intestines pulled out. "Consider the alternatives," said Aunt Lydia. "You see what things used to be like? That was what they thought of women then." Her voice trembled with indignation. Moira said later that it wasn't real, it was done with models. But it was hard to tell. Sometimes, though, the movie would be what Aunt Lydia called an unwoman documentary. "Imagine," said Aunt Lydia, "wasting their time like that, when they should have been doing something useful." Back then, the unwomen were always wasting time. They were encouraged to do it. The government gave them money to do that very thing. Mind you, some of their ideas were sound enough, she went on, with the smug authority in her voice of one who is in a position to judge. We would have to condone some of their ideas, even today. Only some, mind you, she said coyly, raising her index finger, waggling it at us. But they were godless, and that can make all the difference, don't you agree? I sit on my mat, hands folded, and Aunt Lydia steps to the side, away from the screen, and the lights go out, and I wonder whether I can, in the dark, lean far over to the right without being seen and whisper to the woman next to me. What will I whisper? I will say, "Have you seen Moira?" Because nobody has. She wasn't at breakfast. But the room, although dim, isn't dark enough. So I switch my mind into the holding pattern that passes for attention. They don't play the soundtrack on movies like these, though they do on the porno films. They want us to hear the screams and grunts and shrieks of what is supposed to be either extreme pain or extreme pleasure or both at once, but they don't want us to hear what the unwomen are saying. First come the title and some names, blacked out on the film with a crayon so we can't read them, and then I see my mother. My young mother, younger than I remember her, as young as she must have been once before I was born. She's wearing the kind of outfit Aunt Lydia told us was typical of unwomen in those days. Overall jeans with a green and mauve plaid shirt underneath and sneakers on her feet. The sort of thing Moira once wore, the sort of thing I can remember wearing long ago myself. Her hair is tucked into a mauve kerchief tied behind her head. Her face is very young, very serious, even pretty. I've forgotten my mother was once as pretty and as earnest as that. She's in a group of other women, dressed in the same fashion. She's holding a stick. No, it's part of a banner, the handle. The camera pans up and we see the writing, in paint on what must have been a bedsheet. "Take back the night." This hasn't been blacked out, even though we aren't supposed to be reading. The women around me breathe in. There's a stirring in the room, like wind over grass. Is this an oversight? Have we gotten away with something? Or is this a thing we're intended to see, to remind us of the old days of no safety? Behind this sign there are other signs, and the camera notices them briefly, Freedom to choose. Every baby a wanted baby. Recapture our bodies. Do you believe a woman's place is on the kitchen table? Under the last sign there's a line drawing of a woman's body, lying on a table, blood dripping out of it. Now my mother is moving forward. She's smiling, laughing. They all move forward, and now they're raising their fists in the air. The camera moves to the sky, where hundreds of balloons rise, trailing their strings. Red balloons with a circle painted on them, a circle with a stem like the stem of an apple. The stem is a cross. Back on the earth, my mother is part of the crowd now, and I can't see her anymore. I had you when I was 37, my mother said. It was a risk, you could have been deformed or something. You were a wanted child, all right, and did I get shit from some quarters? My oldest buddy Tricia Foreman accused me of being pronatalist. The bitch. Jealousy, I put that down to. Some of the others were okay though. But when I was 6 months pregnant, a lot of them started sending me these articles about how the birth defect rate went zooming up after 35. Just what I needed. And stuff about how hard it was to be a single parent. Fuck that shit, I told them I've started this and I'm gonna finish it. At the hospital they wrote down aged primipara on the chart. I caught them in the act. That's what they call you when it's your first baby over 30. Over 30 for God's sake. Garbage, I told them. Biologically I'm 22. I could run rings around you any day. I could have triplets and walk out of here while you were still trying to get up off the bed. When she said that she'd jut out her chin. I remember her like that, her chin jutted out, a drink in front of her on the kitchen table. Not young and earnest and pretty the way she was in the movie, but wiry, spunky, the kind of old woman who won't let anyone but in front of her in a supermarket line. She liked to come over to my house and have a drink while Luke and I were fixing dinner and tell us what was wrong with her life, which always turned into what was wrong with ours. Her hair was gray by that time, of course. She wouldn't dye it. Why pretend, she'd say. Anyway, what do I need it for? I don't want a man around. What use are they except for 10 seconds worth of half-babies? A man is just a woman's strategy for making other women. Not that your father wasn't a nice guy and all, but he wasn't up to fatherhood. Not that I expected it of him. Just do the job, then you can bugger off. I said, I make a decent salary, I can afford daycare. So he went to the coast and sent Christmas cards. He had beautiful blue eyes though, but there's something missing in them, even the nice ones. It's like they're permanently absent-minded, like they can't quite remember who they are. They look at the sky too much. They lose touch with their feet. They aren't a patch on a woman except they're better at fixing cars and playing football, just what we need for the improvement of the human race, right? That was the way she talked, even in front of Luke. He didn't mind. He teased her by pretending to be macho. He'd tell her women were incapable of abstract thought and she'd have another drink and grin at him. Chauvinist pig, she'd say. Isn't she quaint, Luke would say to me, and my mother would look sly, furtive almost. I'm entitled, she'd say. I'm old enough, I've paid my dues. It's time for me to be quaint. You're still wet behind the ears. Piglet, I should have said. As for you, she'd say to me, you're just a backlash. Flash in the pan. History will absolve me. But she wouldn't say things like that until after the third drink. You young people don't appreciate things, she'd say. You don't know what we had to go through, just to get you where you are. Look at him, slicing up the carrots. Don't you know how many women's lives, how many women's bodies the tanks had to roll over just to get that far? Cooking's my hobby, Luke would say. I enjoy it. Hobby, schmobby, my mother would say. You don't have to make excuses to me. Once upon a time you wouldn't have been allowed to have such a hobby. They'd have called you queer. Now, mother, I would say, let's not get into an argument about nothing. Nothing, she'd say bitterly. You call it nothing. You don't understand, do you? You don't understand at all what I'm talking about. Sometimes she would cry. I was so lonely, she'd say. You have no idea how lonely I was. And I had friends, I was a lucky one. But I was lonely anyway. I admired my mother in some ways, although things between us were never easy. She expected too much from me, I felt. She expected me to vindicate her life for her, and the choices she'd made. I didn't want to live my life on her terms. I didn't want to be the model offspring, the incarnation of her ideas. We used to fight about that. I am not your justification for existence, I said to her once. I want her back. I want everything back the way it was. But there is no point to it, this wanting. Chapter 21. It's hot in here and too noisy. The women's voices rise around me. A soft chant that is still too loud for me. After the days and days of silence. In the corner of the room there's a blood-stained sheet, bundled and tossed there, from when the waters broke. I hadn't noticed it before. The room smells too. The air is close, they should open a window. The smell is of our own flesh, an organic smell, sweat and a tinge of iron, from the blood on the sheet, and another smell, more animal, that's coming, it must be, from Janine. A smell of dens, of inhabited caves, the smell of the plaid blanket on the bed when the cat gave birth on it, once before she was spayed. Smell of matrix. Breathe, breathe, we chant, as we have been taught. Hold, hold, expel, expel, expel. We chant to the count of 5. 5 in, hold for 5, out for 5. Janine, her eyes closed, tries to slow her breathing. Aunt Elizabeth feels for the contractions. Now Janine is restless. She wants to walk. The two women help her off the bed, support her on either side while she paces. A contraction hits her. She doubles over. One of the women kneels and rubs her back. We are all good at this, we've had lessons. I recognize Offred, my shopping partner, sitting 2 away from me. The soft chanting envelopes us like a membrane. A Martha arrives with a tray. A jug of fruit juice, the kind you make from powder, grape it looks like, and a stack of paper cups. She sets it on the rug in front of the chanting women. Offred, not missing a beat, pours, and the paper cups pass down the line. I receive a cup, lean to the side to pass it, and the woman next to me says, low in my ear, are you looking for anyone? Moira, I say just as low. Dark hair, freckles. No, the woman says. I don't know this woman. She wasn't at the center with me, though I've seen her, shopping. But I'll watch for you. Are you? I say. Alma, she says. What's your real name? I want to tell her there was an Alma with me at the center. I want to tell her my name, but Aunt Elizabeth raises her head, staring around the room. She must have heard a break in the chant, so there's no more time. Sometimes you can find things out on birthdays, but there would be no point in asking about Luke. He wouldn't be where any of these women would be likely to see him. The chanting goes on, it begins to catch me. This hard work, you're supposed to concentrate. Identify with your body, said Aunt Elizabeth. Already I can feel slight pains in my belly, and my breasts are heavy. Janine screams, a weak scream, partway between a scream and a groan. She's going into transition, says Aunt Elizabeth. One of the helpers wipes Janine's forehead with a damp cloth. Janine is sweating now. Her hair is escaping in wisps from the elastic band. Bits of it stick to her forehead and neck. Her flesh is damp, saturated, lustrous. Pant, 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 we chant. I want to go outside, says Janine. I want to go for a walk. I feel fine. I have to go to the can. We all know that she's in transition. She doesn't know what she's doing. Which of these statements is true? Probably the last one. Aunt Elizabeth signals. 2 women stand beside the portable toilet. Janine is lowered gently onto it. There's another smell, added to the others in the room. Janine groans again, her head bent over so all we can see is her hair. Crouching like that, she's like a doll, an old one that's been pillaged and discarded in some corner akimbo. Janine is up again and walking. I want to sit down, she says. How long have we been here? Minutes or hours. I'm sweating now, my dress under my arms is drenched. I taste salt on my upper lip. The false pains clench at me. The others feel it too. I can tell by the way they sway. Janine is sucking on an ice cube. Then, after that, inches away or miles, no, she screams, "Oh no, oh no, oh no." It's her second baby, she had another child. Once, I know that from the center, when she used to cry about it at night, like the rest of us, only more noisily. So she ought to be able to remember this, what it's like, what's coming. But who can remember pain once it's over? All that remains of it is a shadow, not in the mind, even in the flesh. Pain marks you, but too deep to see. Out of sight, out of mind. Someone has spiked the grape juice. Someone has pinched a bottle from downstairs. It won't be the first time at such a gathering, but they'll turn a blind eye. We too need our orgies. Dim the lights, says Aunt Elizabeth. Tell her it's time. Someone stands, moves to the wall. The light in the room fades to twilight. Our voices dwindle to a chorus of creaks, of husky whispers, like grasshoppers in a field at night. Two leave the room. Two others lead Janine to the birthing stool, where she sits on the lower of the two seats. She's calmer now. Air sucks evenly into her lungs. We lean forward, tensed. The muscles in our backs and bellies hurt from the strain. It's coming like a bugle, a call to arms, like a wall falling. We can feel it like a heavy stone moving down. Pulled down inside us, we think we will burst. We grip each other's hands, we are no longer single. The commander's wife hurries in her ridiculous white cotton nightgown, her spindly legs sticking out beneath it. Two of the wives in their blue dresses and veils hold her by the arms, as if she needs it. She has a tight little smile on her face, like a hostess at a party she'd rather not be giving. She must know what we think of her. She scrambles onto the birthing stool, sits on the seat behind and above Janine, so that Janine is framed by her. Her skinny legs come down on either side, like the arms of an eccentric chair. Oddly enough, she's wearing white cotton socks and bedroom slippers, blue ones made of fuzzy material like toilet seat covers. But we pay no attention to the wife, we hardly even see her. Our eyes are on Janine. In the dim light, in her white gown, she glows like a moon in cloud. She's grunting now with the effort. Push, 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 we whisper. Relax, pant. Push, push, push. We're with her, we're the same as her, we're drunk. Aunt Elizabeth kneels, with an outspread towel to catch the baby. Here's the crowning, the glory, the head, purple and smeared with yogurt. Another push and it slithers out, slick with fluid and blood, into our waiting. Oh praise! We hold our breath as Aunt Elizabeth inspects it. A girl, poor thing, but so far so good. At least there's nothing wrong with it. That can be seen, hands, feet, eyes, we silently count. Everything is in place. Aunt Elizabeth, holding the baby, looks up at us and smiles. We smile too, we are one smile. Tears run down our cheeks, we are so happy. Our happiness is part memory. What I remember is Luke, with me in the hospital, standing beside my head, holding my hand, in the green gown and white mask they gave him. Oh, he said, "Oh Jesus," breath coming out in wonder. That night he couldn't go to sleep at all, he said, he was so high. Aunt Elizabeth is gently washing the baby off. It isn't crying much. It stops. As quietly as possible, so as not to startle it, we rise, crowd around Janine, squeezing her, patting her. She's crying too. The two wives in blue help the third wife, the wife of the household, down from the birthing stool and over to the bed, where they lay her down and tuck her in. The baby, washed now and quiet, is placed ceremoniously in her arms. The wives from downstairs are crowding in now, pushing among us, pushing us aside. They talk too loud. Some of them are still carrying their plates, their coffee cups, their wine glasses. Some of them are still chewing. They cluster around the bed, the mother and child, cooing and congratulating. Envy radiates from them. I can smell it. Faint wisps of acid. mingled with their perfume. The commander's wife looks down at the baby as if it's a bouquet of flowers. Something she's won? A tribute. The wives are here to bear witness to the naming. It's the wives who do the naming around here. Angela, says the commander's wife. Angela, Angela, the wives repeat, twittering. What a sweet name. Oh, she's perfect. Oh, she's wonderful. We stand between Janine and the bed, so she won't have to see this. Someone gives her a drink of grape juice. I hope there's wine in it. She's still having the pains. For the afterbirth, she's crying helplessly, burnt out miserable tears. Nevertheless, we are jubilant. It's a victory. For all of us. We've done it. She'll be allowed to nurse the baby. For a few months, they believe in mother's milk. After that, she'll be transferred to see if she can do it again with someone else who needs a turn. But she'll never be sent to the colonies. She'll never be declared unwoman. That is her reward. The birth mobile is waiting outside to deliver us back to our own households. The doctors are still in their van. Their faces appear at the window, white blobs, like the faces of sick children confined to the house. One of them opens the door and comes towards us. Was it all right? He asks, anxious. Yes, I say. By now I'm wrung out, exhausted. My breasts are painful, they're leaking a little. Fake milk, it happens this way with some of us. We sit on our benches, facing one another as we are transported. We're without emotion now, almost without feeling. We might be bundles of red cloth. We ache. Each of us holds in her lap a phantom, a ghost baby. What confronts us, now the excitement's over, is our own failure. Mother, I think, wherever you may be, can you hear me? You wanted a women's culture. Well, now there is one. It isn't what you meant, but it exists. Be thankful for small mercies. Chapter 22. By the time the birth mobile arrives in front of the house, it's late afternoon. The sun is coming weakly through the clouds. The smell of wet grass warming up is in the air. I've been at the birth all day, you lose track of time. Cora will have done the shopping today. I'm excused from all duties. I go up the stairs, lifting my feet heavily from one step to the next, holding onto the banister. I feel as if I've been awake for days and running hard. My chest hurts. My muscles cramp as if they're out of sugar. For once I welcome solitude. I lie on the bed. I would like to rest, go to sleep, but I'm too tired, at the same time too excited. My eyes won't close. I look up at the ceiling, tracing the foliage of the wreath. Today it makes me think of a hat, the large-brimmed hats women used to wear at some period during the old days. Hats like enormous halos, festooned with fruit and flowers, and the feathers of exotic birds. Hats like an idea of paradise, floating just above the head, a thought solidified. In a minute the wreath will start to color and I will begin seeing things. That's how tired I am. As when you'd driven all night into the dawn. For some reason, I won't think about that now, keeping each other awake with stories and taking turns at the wheel, and as the sun would begin to come up you'd see things at the sides of your eyes. Purple animals in the bushes beside the road, the vague outlines of men, which would disappear when you looked at them straight. I'm too tired to go on with this story. I'm too tired to think about where I am. Here is a different story, a better one. This is the story of what happened to Moira. Part of it I can fill in myself, part of it I heard from Alma, who heard it from Dolores, who heard it from Janine. Janine heard it from Aunt Lydia. There can be alliances even in such places, even under such circumstances. This is something you can depend upon. There will always be alliances of one kind or another. Aunt Lydia called Janine into her office. Blessed be the fruit, Janine, Aunt Lydia would have said, without looking up from her desk, where she was writing something. For every rule there is always an exception. This too can be depended upon. The aunts are allowed to read and write. May the Lord open, Janine would have replied, tonelessly, in her transparent voice, her voice of raw egg white. "I feel I can rely on you, Janine," Aunt Lydia would have said, raising her eyes from the page at last and fixing Janine with that look of hers. Through the spectacles, a look that managed to be both menacing and beseeching all at once. "Help me," that look said, "we are all in this together. You are a reliable girl," she went on, not like some of the others. She thought all Janine's sniveling and repentance meant something. She thought Janine had been broken. She thought Janine was a true believer. But by that time Janine was like a puppy that's been kicked too often, by too many people at random. She'd roll over for anyone, she'd tell anything, just for a moment of approbation. So Janine would have said, "I hope so, Aunt Lydia. I hope I have become worthy of your trust." Or some such thing. "Janine," said Aunt Lydia, "something terrible has happened." Janine looked down at the floor. Whatever it was, she knew she would not be blamed for it. She was blameless. But what use had that been to her in the past, to be blameless? So at the same time she felt guilty, and as if she was about to be punished. "Do you know about it, Janine?" said Aunt Lydia softly. "No, Aunt Lydia," said Janine. She knew at this moment it was necessary to look up, to look Aunt Lydia straight in the eyes. After a moment she managed it. "Because if you do, I will be very disappointed in you," said Aunt Lydia. "As the Lord is my witness," said Janine with a show of fervor. Aunt Lydia allowed herself one of her pauses. She fiddled with her pen. "Moira is no longer with us," she said at last. "Oh," said Janine. She was neutral about this. Moira wasn't a friend of hers. "Is she dead?" she asked after a moment. Then Aunt Lydia told her the story. Moira had raised her hand to go to the washroom during exercises. She had gone. Aunt Elizabeth was on washroom duty. Aunt Elizabeth stayed outside the washroom door, as usual. Moira went in. After a moment Moira called to Aunt Elizabeth. The toilet was overflowing. Could Aunt Elizabeth come and fix it? It was true that the toilets sometimes overflowed. Unknown persons stuffed wads of toilet paper down them to make them do this very thing. The aunts had been working on some foolproof way of preventing this, but funds were short and right now they had to make do with what was at hand, and they hadn't figured out a way of locking up the toilet paper. Possibly they should keep it outside the door on a table and hand each person a sheet or several sheets as she went in. But that was for the future. Takes a while to get the wrinkles out of anything new. Aunt Elizabeth, suspecting no harm, went into the washroom. Aunt Lydia had to admit it was a little foolish of her. On the other hand, she'd gone in to fix a toilet on several previous occasions without mishap. Moira was not lying, water was running over the floor, and several pieces of disintegrating fecal matter. It was not pleasant and Aunt Elizabeth was annoyed. Moira stood politely aside, and Aunt Elizabeth hurried into the cubicle Moira had indicated and bent over the back of the toilet. She intended to lift off the porcelain lid and fiddle with the arrangement of bulb and plug inside. She had both hands on the lid when she felt something hard and sharp and possibly metallic jab into her ribs from behind. "Don't move," said Moira, "or I'll stick it all the way in, I know where. I'll puncture your lung." They found out afterwards that she'd dismantled the inside of one of the toilets and taken out the long thin pointed lever, the part that attaches to the handle at one end and the chain at the other. It isn't too hard to do if you know how, and Moira had mechanical ability. She used to fix her own car, the minor things. Soon after this, the toilets were fitted with chains to hold the tops on, and when they overflowed it took a long time to get them open. We had several floods that way. Aunt Elizabeth couldn't see what was poking into her back, Aunt Lydia said. "She was a brave woman." "Oh yes," said Janine. "But not foolhardy," said Aunt Lydia, frowning a little. Janine had been overenthusiastic, which sometimes has the force of a denial. She did as Moira said. Aunt Lydia continued. Moira got hold of her cattle prod and her whistle, ordering Aunt Elizabeth to unclip them from her belt. Then she hurried Aunt Elizabeth down the stairs to the basement. They were on the second floor, not the third, so there were only 2 flights of stairs to be negotiated. Classes were in session, so there was nobody in the halls. They did see another aunt, but she was at the far end of the corridor and not looking their way. Aunt Elizabeth could have screamed at this point, but she knew Moira meant what she said. Moira had a bad reputation. "Oh yes," said Janine. Moira took Aunt Elizabeth along the corridor of empty lockers, past the door to the gymnasium, and into the furnace room. She told Aunt Elizabeth to take off all her clothes. "Oh," said Janine weakly, as if to protest this sacrilege. And Moira took off her own clothes and put on those of Aunt Elizabeth, which did not fit her exactly but well enough. She was not overly cruel to Aunt Elizabeth. She allowed her to put on her own red dress. The veil she tore into strips, and tied Aunt Elizabeth up with them, in behind the furnace. She stuffed some of the cloth into her mouth and tied it in place with another strip. She tied a strip around Aunt Elizabeth's neck and tied the other end to her feet, behind. "She is a cunning and dangerous woman," said Aunt Lydia. Janine said, "May I sit down?" as if it had all been too much for her. She had something to trade at last, for a token at least. "Yes, Janine," said Aunt Lydia, surprised, but knowing she could not refuse at this point. She was asking for Janine's attention, her cooperation. She indicated the chair in the corner. Janine drew it forward. "I could kill you, you know," said Moira, when Aunt Elizabeth was safely stowed out of sight behind the furnace. "I could injure you badly so you would never feel good in your body again. I could zap you with this or stick this thing into your eye. Just remember I didn't, if it ever comes to that." Aunt Lydia didn't repeat any of this part to Janine, but I expect Moira said something like it. In any case, she didn't kill or mutilate Aunt Elizabeth, who a few days later, after she'd recovered from her 7 hours behind the furnace and presumably from the interrogation, for the possibility of collusion would not have been ruled out, by the aunts or by anyone else, was back in operation at the center. Moira stood up straight and looked firmly ahead. She drew her shoulders back, pulled up her spine, and compressed her lips. This was not our usual posture. Usually we walked with heads bent down, our eyes on our hands or the ground. Moira didn't look much like Aunt Elizabeth, even with the brown wimple in place, but her stiff-backed posture was apparently enough to convince the angels on guard, who never looked at any of us very closely, even and perhaps especially the aunts, because Moira marched straight out the front door with the bearing of a person who knew where she was going. Was saluted, presented Aunt Elizabeth's pass, which they didn't bother to check, because who would affront an aunt in that way, and disappeared. "Oh," said Janine. Who can tell what she felt? Maybe she wanted to cheer. If so, she kept it well hidden. "So, Janine," said Aunt Lydia, "here is what I want you to do." Janine opened her eyes wide and tried to look innocent and attentive. "I want you to keep your ears open. Maybe one of the others was involved." "Yes, Aunt Lydia," said Janine. "And come and tell me about it, won't you, dear? If you hear anything." "Yes, Aunt Lydia," said Janine. She knew she would not have to kneel down any more, at the front of the classroom, and listen to all of us shouting at her that it was her fault. Now it would be someone else for a while. She was temporarily off the hook. The fact that she told Dolores all about this encounter in Aunt Lydia's office meant nothing. It didn't mean she wouldn't testify against us, any of us, if she had the occasion. We knew that. By this time we were treating her the way people used to treat those with no legs who sold pencils on street corners. We avoided her when we could, were charitable to her when it couldn't be helped. She was a danger to us, we knew that. Dolores probably patted her on the back and said she was a good sport to tell us. Where did this exchange take place? In the gymnasium when we were getting ready for bed. Dolores had the bed next to Janine's. The story passed among us that night, in the semi-darkness, under our breath, from bed to bed. Moira was out there somewhere. She was at large or dead. What would she do? The thought of what she would do expanded till it filled the room. At any moment there might be a shattering explosion. The glass of the windows would fall inwards. The doors would swing open. Moira had power now. She'd been set loose. She'd set herself loose. She was now a loose woman. I think we found this frightening. Moira was like an elevator with open sides. She made us dizzy. Already we were losing the taste for freedom. Already we were finding these walls secure. In the upper reaches of the atmosphere you'd come apart, you'd vaporize. There would be no pressure holding you together. Nevertheless, Moira was our fantasy. We hugged her to us. She was with us in secret, a giggle. She was lava beneath the crust of daily life. In the light of Moira, the ants were less fearsome and more absurd. Their power had a flaw to it. They could be shanghaied in toilets. The audacity was what we liked. We expected her to be dragged in at any minute, as she had been before. We could not imagine what they might do to her this time. It would be very bad, whatever it was. But nothing happened. Moira didn't reappear. She hasn't yet. Chapter 23. This is a reconstruction. All of it is a reconstruction. It's a reconstruction now in my head, as I lie flat on my single bed rehearsing what I should or shouldn't have said, what I should or shouldn't have done, how I should have played it. If I ever get out of here, let's stop there. I intend to get out of here. Can't last forever. Others have thought such things in bad times before this, and they were always right. They did get out one way or another, and it didn't last forever. Although for them it may have lasted all the forever they had. When I get out of here, if I'm ever able to set this down in any form, even in the form of one voice to another, it will be a reconstruction then too, at yet another remove. It's impossible to say a thing exactly the way it was, because what you say can never be exact. You always have to leave something out. There are too many parts, sides, cross-currents, nuances. Too many gestures which could mean this or that. Too many shapes which can never be fully described. Too many flavors in the air or on the tongue, half-colors, too many. But if you happen to be a man sometime in the future and you've made it this far, please remember, you will never be subjected to the temptation of feeling you must forgive a man as a woman. It's difficult to resist. Believe me. But remember that forgiveness too is a power. To beg for it is a power, and to withhold or bestow it is a power, perhaps the greatest. Maybe none of this is about control. Maybe it isn't really about who can own whom, who can do what to whom and get away with it, even as far as death. Maybe it isn't about who can sit and who has to kneel or stand or lie down, legs spread open. Maybe it's about who can do what to whom and be forgiven for it. Never tell me it amounts to the same thing. I want you to kiss me, said the commander. Well, of course something came before that. Such requests never come flying out of the blue. I went to sleep after all and dreamed I was wearing earrings and one of them was broken. Nothing beyond that, just the brain going through its back files, and I was wakened by Cora with the dinner tray, and time was back on track. "It a good baby?" says Cora as she's setting down the tray. She must know already. They have a kind of word-of-mouth telegraph. From household to household, news gets around. But it gives her pleasure to hear about it, as if my words will make it more real. "It's fine," I say. "A keeper. A girl." Cora smiles at me, a smile which includes, "These are the moments that must make what she is doing seem worthwhile to her." "That's good," she says. Her voice is almost wistful, and I think, of course, she would have liked to have been there. It's like a party she couldn't go to. "Maybe we have one soon," she says shyly. By we she means me. It's up to me to repay the team, justify my food, and keep, like a queen ant with eggs. Rita may disapprove of me, but Cora does not. Instead, she depends on me. She hopes, and I am the vehicle for her hope. Her hope is of the simplest kind. She wants a birthday here with guests and food and presents. She wants a little child to spoil in the kitchen, to iron clothes for, to slip cookies into when no one's watching. I am to provide these joys for her. I would rather have the disapproval. I feel more worthy of it. The dinner is beef stew. I have some trouble finishing it, because halfway through it I remember what the day has erased right out of my head. It's true what they say, it's a trance state, giving birth or being there. You lose track of the rest of your life, you focus only on that one instant. But now it comes back to me, and I know I'm not prepared. The clock in the hall downstairs strikes 9. I press my hands against the sides of my thighs, breath in, set out along the hall and softly down the stairs. Serena Joy may still be at the house where the birth took place. That's lucky, he couldn't have foreseen it. On these days the wives hang around for hours, helping to open the presents, gossiping, getting drunk. Something has to be done to dispel their envy. I follow the downstairs corridor back, past the door that leads into the kitchen, along to the next door, his. I stand outside it, feeling like a child who's been summoned, at school, to the principal's office. What have I done wrong? My presence here is illegal. It's forbidden for us to be alone with the commanders. We are for breeding purposes. We aren't concubines, geisha girls, courtesans. On the contrary, everything possible has been done to remove us from that category. There is supposed to be nothing entertaining about us. No room is to be permitted for the flowering of secret lusts. No special favors are to be wheedled by them or us. There are to be no toeholds for love. We are two-legged wombs, that's all. Sacred vessels, ambulatory chalices. So why does he want to see me at night, alone? If I'm caught, it's to Serena's tender mercies I'll be delivered. He isn't supposed to meddle in such household discipline. That's women's business. After that reclassification, I could become an unwoman, but to refuse to see him could be worse. There's no doubt about who holds the real power. But there must be something he wants from me. To want is to have a weakness. It's this weakness, whatever it is, that entices me. It's like a small crack in a wall, before now impenetrable. If I press my eye to it, this weakness of his, I may be able to see my way clear. I want to know what he wants. I raise my hand, knock, on the door of this forbidden room where I have never been, where women do not go. Not even Serena Joy comes here, and the cleaning is done by guardians. What secrets, what male totems are kept in here? I'm told to enter. I open the door, step in. What is on the other side is normal life. I should say, what is on the other side looks like normal life. There is a desk, of course, with a computalk on it, and a black leather chair behind it. There's a potted plant on the desk, a pen holder set, papers. There's an oriental rug on the floor, and a fireplace without a fire in it. There's a small sofa, covered in brown plush, a television set, an end table, a couple of chairs. But all around the walls there are bookcases. They're filled with books. Books and books and books, right out in plain view, no locks, no boxes. No wonder we can't come in here. It's an oasis of the forbidden. I try not to stare. The commander is standing in front of the fireless fireplace, back to it, one elbow on the carved wooden overmantel, other hand in his pocket. It's such a studied pose, something of the country squire, some old come-on from a glossy men's mag. He probably decided ahead of time that he'd be standing like that when I came in. When I knocked, he probably rushed over to the fireplace and propped himself up. He should have a black patch over one eye, a cravat with horseshoes on it. It's all very well for me to think these things, quick as staccato, a jittering of the brain, an inner jeering, but it's panic. The fact is I'm terrified. I don't say anything. Close the door behind you, he says, pleasantly enough. I do it and turn back. Hello, he says. It's the old form of greeting. I haven't heard it for a long time, for years. Under the circumstances it seems out of place, comical, even a flip backward in time, a stunt. I can think of nothing appropriate to say in return. I think I will cry. He must have noticed this because he looks at me, puzzled, gives a little frown I choose to interpret as concern, though it may merely be irritation. Here, he says, you can sit down. He pulls a chair out for me, sets it in front of his desk. Then he goes around behind the desk and sits down, slowly, and it seems to me elaborately. What this act tells me is that he hasn't brought me here to touch me in any way, against my will. He smiles. The smile is not sinister or predatory. It's merely a smile, a formal kind of smile, friendly but a little distant, as if I'm a kitten in a window. One he's looking at but doesn't intend to buy. I sit up straight on the chair, my hands folded on my lap. I feel as if my feet in their flat red shoes aren't quite touching the floor. But of course they are. You must find this strange, he says. I simply look at him. The understatement of the year was a phrase my mother uses. Used. I feel like cotton candy. Sugar and air. Squeeze me and I'd turn into a small sickly damp wad of weeping pinky red. I guess it is a little strange, he says, as if I've answered. I think I should have a hat on, tied with a bow under my chin. I want, he says. I try not to lean forward. Yes, yes, yes. What then? What does he want? But I won't give it away, this eagerness of mine. It's a bargaining session. Things are about to be exchanged. She who does not hesitate is lost. I'm not giving anything away. Selling only. I would like dash, he says. This will sound silly, and he does look embarrassed. Sheepish was the word, the way men used to look once. He's old enough to remember how to look that way, and to remember also how appealing women once found it. The young ones don't know those tricks. They've never had to use them. I'd like you to play a game of Scrabble with me, he says. I hold myself absolutely rigid. I keep my face unmoving. So that's what's in the forbidden room. Scrabble. I want to laugh, shriek with laughter, fall off my chair. This was once the game of old women, old men, in the summers or in retirement villas, to be played when there was nothing good on television. Or of adolescence once long, long ago. My mother had a set, kept at the back of the hall cupboard, with the Christmas tree decorations in their cardboard boxes. Once she tried to interest me in it, when I was 13 and miserable and at loose ends. Now of course it's something different. Now it's forbidden, for us. Now it's dangerous. Now it's indecent. Now it's something he can't do with his wife. Now it's desirable. Now he's compromised himself. It's as if he's offered me drugs. All right, I say, as if indifferent. I can in fact hardly speak. He doesn't say why he wants to play Scrabble with me. I don't ask him. He merely takes a box out from one of the drawers in his desk and opens it up. There are the plasticized wooden counters I remember, the board divided into squares, the little holders for setting the letters in. He dumps the counters out on the top of his desk and begins to turn them over. After a moment, I join in. You know how to play? He says. I nod. We play 2 games. Larynx, I spell. Valence. Quince. Zygote. I hold the glossy counters with their smooth edges. Finger the letters. The feeling is voluptuous. This is freedom, and I blink of it. Limp, I spell. Gorge. What a luxury. The counters are like candies made of peppermint, cool like that. Humbugs, those were called. I would like to put them into my mouth. They would taste also of lime. The letter C crisp, slightly acid on the tongue. Delicious. I win the first game, I let him win the second. I still haven't discovered what the terms are, what I will be able to ask for in exchange. Finally, he tells me it's time for me to go home. Those are the words he uses, go home. He means to my room. He asks me if I will be all right, as if the stairway is a dark street. I say yes. We open his study door, just a crack, and listen for noises in the hall. This is like being on a date. This is like sneaking into the dorm after hours. This is conspiracy. Thank you, he says, for the game. Then he says, I want you to kiss me. I think about how I could take the back of the toilet apart, the toilet in my own bathroom, on a bath night, quickly and quietly, so Cora outside on the chair would not hear me. I could get the sharp lever out and hide it in my sleeve, and smuggle it into the commander's study the next time, because after a request like that there's always a next time, whether you say yes or no. I think about how I could approach the commander, to kiss him here alone and take off his jacket, as if to allow or invite something further, some approach to true love, and put my arms around him and slip the lever out from the sleeve and drive the sharp end into him suddenly, between his ribs. I think about the blood coming out of him, hot as soup, sexual, over my hands. In fact, I don't think about anything of the kind. I put it in only afterwards. Maybe I should have thought about that at the time, but I didn't. As I said, this is a reconstruction. All right, I say. I go to him and place my lips, closed, against his. I smell the shaving lotion, the usual kind, the hint of mothballs, familiar enough to me. But he's like someone I've only just met. He draws away, looks down at me. There's the smile again, the sheepish one. Such candor. Not like that, he says. As if you meant it. He was so sad. That is a reconstruction, too. Night. Chapter 24. I go back, along the dimmed hall and up the muffled stairs, stealthily to my room. There I sit in the chair with the lights off, in my red dress, hooked and buttoned. You can think clearly only with your clothes on. What I need is perspective. The illusion of depth created by a frame, the arrangement of shapes on a flat surface. Perspective is necessary. Otherwise, there are only two dimensions. Otherwise, you live with your face squashed against a wall. Everything a huge foreground, of details, close-ups, hairs, the weave of the bedsheet, the molecules of the face. Your own skin like a map, a diagram of futility, crisscrossed with tiny roads that lead nowhere. Otherwise, you live in the moment, which is not where I want to be. But that's where I am. There's no escaping it. Time's a trap. I'm caught in it. I must forget about my secret name and always back. My name is Offred now, and here is where I live. Live in the present. Make the most of it. It's all you've got. Time to take stock. I am 33 years old. I have brown hair. I stand 5'7" without shoes. I have trouble remembering what I used to look like. I have viable ovaries. I have one more chance. But something has changed now, tonight. Circumstances have altered. I can ask for something. Possibly not much, but something. Men are sex machines, said Aunt Lydia, and not much more. They only want one thing. You must learn to manipulate them for your own good. Lead them around by the nose. That is a metaphor. It's nature's way. It's God's device. It's the way things are. Aunt Lydia did not actually say this, but it was implicit in everything she did say. It hovered over her head, like the golden mottos over the saints of the darker ages. Like them too, she was angular and without flesh. But how to fit the commander into this as he exists in his study with his word games and his desire for what? To be played with, to be gently kissed, as if I meant it. I know I need to take it seriously, this desire of his. It could be important, it could be a passport, it could be my downfall. I need to be earnest about it, I need to ponder it. But no matter what I do, sitting here in the dark, with the searchlights illuminating the oblong of my window, from outside, through the curtains gauzy as a bridal dress, as ectoplasm, one of my hands holding the other, rocking back and forth a little, no matter what I do there's something hilarious about it. He wanted me to play Scrabble with him, and kiss him as if I meant it. This is one of the most bizarre things that's happened to me. Ever. Context is all. I remember a television program I saw once. A rerun made years before. I must have been 7 or 8, too young to understand it. It was the sort of thing my mother liked to watch, historical, educational. She tried to explain it to me afterwards, to tell me that the things in it had really happened. But to me it was only a story. I thought someone had made it up. I suppose all children think that about any history before their own. If it's only a story, it becomes less frightening. The program was a documentary about one of those wars. They interviewed people and showed clips from films of the time, black and white and still photos. I don't remember much about it, but I remember the quality of the pictures, the way everything in them seemed to be coated with a mixture of sunlight and dust, and how dark the shadows were under people's eyebrows and along their cheekbones. The interviews with people still alive then were in color. The one I remember best was with a woman who had been the mistress of a man who had supervised one of the camps where they put the Jews before they killed them. In ovens, my mother said. But there weren't any pictures of the ovens, so I got some confused notion that these deaths had taken place in kitchens. There is something especially terrifying to a child in that idea. Ovens mean cooking, and cooking comes before eating. I thought these people had been eaten, which in a way I suppose they had been. From what they said, the man had been cruel and brutal. The mistress, my mother explained mistress, she did not believe in mystification. I had a pop-up book of sexual organs by the time I was 4. The mistress had once been very beautiful. There was a black and white shot of her and another woman, in the two-piece bathing suits and platform shoes and picture hats of the time. They were wearing cat's-eye sunglasses and sitting in deck chairs by a swimming pool. The swimming pool was beside their house, which was near the camp with the ovens. The woman said she didn't notice much that she found unusual. She denied knowing about the ovens. At the time of the interview, 40 or 50 years later, she was dying of emphysema. She coughed a lot, and she was very thin, almost emaciated. But she still took pride in her appearance. "Look at that," said my mother, half grudgingly, half admiringly. "She still takes pride in her appearance." She was carefully made up, heavy mascara on her eyelashes, rouge on the bones of her cheeks, over which the skin was stretched like a rubber glove pulled tight. She was wearing pearls. "He was not a monster," she said. "People say he was a monster, but he was not one." What could she have been thinking about? Not much, I guess. Not back then, not at the time. She was thinking about how not to think. The times were abnormal. She took pride in her appearance. She did not believe he was a monster. He was not a monster to her. Probably he had some endearing trait. He whistled off-key in the shower. He had a yen for truffles. He called his dog Liebchen and made it sit up for little pieces of raw steak. How easy it is to invent a humanity for anyone at all. What an available temptation. A big child, she would have said to herself. Her heart would have melted. She'd have smoothed the hair back from his forehead, kissed him on the ear, and not just to get something out of him either. The instinct to soothe, to make it better. There, she'd say, as he woke from a nightmare. Things are so hard for you. All this she would have believed, because otherwise how could she have kept on living? She was very ordinary under that beauty. She believed in decency. She was nice to the Jewish maid, or nice enough, nicer than she needed to be. Several days after this interview with her was filmed, she killed herself. Said that right on television. Nobody asked her whether or not she had loved him. What I remember now most of all is the makeup. I stand up, in the dark, start to unbutton. Then I hear something inside my body. I've broken, something has cracked, that must be it. Noise is coming up, coming out of the broken place, in my face. Without warning. I wasn't thinking about here or there or anything. If I let the noise get out into the air, it will be laughter, too loud, too much of it someone is bound to hear, and then there will be hurrying footsteps and commands and who knows? Judgment. Emotion inappropriate to the occasion. The wandering womb, they used to think. Hysteria. And then a needle, a pill, could be fatal. I cram both hands over my mouth as if I'm about to be sick. Drop to my knees. The laughter boiling like lava in my throat. I crawl into the cupboard, draw up my knees. I'll choke on it. My ribs hurt with holding back. I shake, I heave, seismic, volcanic, I'll burst. Red all over the cupboard. Mirth rhymes with birth. Oh, to die of laughter. I stifle it in the folds of the hanging cloak, clench my eyes, from which tears are squeezing. Try to compose myself. After a while it passes like an epileptic fit. Here I am in the closet. No light bastards carborundum. I can't see it in the dark, but I trace the tiny scratched writing with the ends of my fingers, as if it's a code in Braille. It sounds in my head now less like a prayer, more like a command. But to do what? Useless to me in any case, an ancient hieroglyph to which the key's been lost. Why did she write it? Why did she bother? There's no way out of here. I lie on the floor, breathing too fast, then slower, evening out my breathing, as in the exercises for giving birth. All I can hear now is the sound of my own heart, opening and closing, opening and closing, opening. 10. Soul Scrolls. Chapter 25. What I heard first the next morning was a scream and a crash. Cora, dropping the breakfast tray. It woke me up. I was still half in the cupboard, head on the bundled cloak. I must have pulled it off the hanger and gone to sleep there. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Cora was kneeling beside me. I felt her hand touch my back. She screamed again when I moved. "What's wrong?" I said. I rolled over, pushed myself up. "Oh," she said. I thought. She thought what? Like she said. The eggs had broken on the floor. There was orange juice and shattered glass. "I'll have to bring another one," she said. "Such a waste. What was you doing on the floor like that?" She was pulling at me to get me up, respectably onto my feet. I didn't want to tell her I'd never been to bed at all. There would be no way of explaining that. I told her I must have fainted. That was almost as bad because she seized on it. "It's one of the early signs," she said, pleased. "That and throwing up." She should have known there hadn't been time enough. But she was very hopeful. "No, it's not that," I said. I was sitting in the chair. "I'm sure it isn't that. I was just dizzy. I was just standing here and things went dark." "It must have been the strain," she said, "of yesterday and all. Takes it out of you." She meant the birth, and I said it did. By this time I was sitting in the chair, and she was kneeling on the floor, picking up the pieces of broken glass and egg, gathering them onto the tray. She blotted some of the orange juice with the paper napkin. "I'll have to bring a cloth," she said. "They'll want to know why the extra eggs. Unless you could do without." She looked up at me sideways, slyly, and I saw that it would be better if we could both pretend I'd eaten my breakfast after all. If she said she'd found me lying on the floor, there would be too many questions. She'd have to account for the broken glass in any case. But Rita would get surly if she had to cook a second breakfast. "I'll do without," I said. "I'm not that hungry." This was good. It fit in with the dizziness. "But I could manage the toast," I said. I didn't want to go without breakfast altogether. "It's been on the floor," she said. "I don't mind," I said. I sat there eating the piece of brown toast while she went into the bathroom and flushed the handful of egg, which could not be salvaged, down the toilet. Then she came back. "I'll say I dropped the tray on the way out," she said. It pleased me that she was willing to lie for me, even in such a small thing, even for her own advantage. It was a link between us. I smiled at her. "I hope nobody heard you," I said. "It did give me a turn," she said, as she stood in the doorway with the tray. "At first I thought it was just your clothes, like." Then I said to myself, "What are they doing there on the floor? I thought maybe you'd run off," I said. "Well, but," she said. "But it was you." "Yes," I said. "It was. And she went out with the tray and came back with a cloth for the rest of the orange juice. And Rita that afternoon made a grumpy remark about some folks being all thumbs. Too much on their minds, don't look where they're going, she said, and we continued on from there as if nothing had happened. That was in May. Spring has now been undergone. The tulips have had their moment and are done, shedding their petals one by one, like teeth. One day I came upon Serena Joy, kneeling on a cushion in the garden, her cane beside her on the grass. She was snipping off the seed pods with a pair of shears. I watched her sideways as I went past, with my basket of oranges and lamb chops. She was aiming, positioning the blades of the shears, then cutting with a convulsive jerk of the hands. Was it the arthritis creeping up? Or some blitzkrieg, some kamikaze, committed on the swelling genitalia of the flowers? The fruiting body. To cut off the seed pods is supposed to make the bulb store energy. Saint Serena, on her knees doing penance. I often amused myself this way, with small mean-minded bitter jokes about her. But not for long. It doesn't do to linger watching Serena Joy from behind. What I coveted was the shears. Well, then we had the irises, rising beautiful and cool on their tall stalks, like blown glass, like pastel water momentarily frozen in a splash, light blue, light mauve, and the darker ones, velvet and purple, black cat's ears in the sun, indigo shadow, and the bleeding hearts, so female in shape it was a surprise they'd not long since been rooted out. There is something subversive about this garden of Serena's. A sense of buried things bursting upwards, wordlessly, into the light, as if to point, to say, whatever is silenced will clamor to be heard, though silently. A Tennyson garden, heavy with scent, languid. The return of the word swoon. Light pours down upon it from the sun, true, but also heat rises. From the flowers themselves you can feel it. Like holding your hand an inch above an arm, a shoulder. It breathes in the warmth, breathing itself in. To walk through it in these days, of peonies, of pinks and carnations, makes my head swim. The willow is in full plumage and is no help, with its insinuating whispers. Rendezvous, it says terraces. The sibilants run up my spine, a shiver as if in fever. The summer dress rustles against the flesh of my thighs. The grass grows underfoot. At the edges of my eyes there are movements. In the branches. Feathers, flittings, grace notes, tree into bird, metamorphosis run wild. Goddesses are possible now and the air suffuses with desire. Even the bricks of the house are softening, becoming tactile. If I leaned against them they'd be warm and yielding. It's amazing what denial can do. Did the sight of my ankle make him lighthearted, faint at the checkpoint yesterday, when I dropped my pass and let him pick it up for me? No handkerchief, no fan. I use what's handy. Winter is not so dangerous. I need hardness, cold, rigidity. Not this heaviness, as if I'm a melon on a stem, this liquid ripeness. The commander and I have an arrangement. It's not the first such arrangement in history, though the shape it's taken is not the usual one. I visit the commander 2 or 3 nights a week, always after dinner, but only when I get the signal. The signal is Nick. If he's polishing the car when I set out for the shopping or when I come back, and if his hat is on askew or not on at all, then I go. If he isn't there or if he has his hat on straight, then I stay in my room in the ordinary way. On ceremony nights, of course, none of this applies. The difficulty is the wife, as always. After dinner she goes to their bedroom, from where she could conceivably hear me as I sneak along the hall, although I take care to be very quiet. Or she stays in the sitting room, knitting away at her endless angel scarves, turning out more and more yards of intricate and useless wool people. Her form of procreation, it must be. The sitting room door is usually left ajar when she's in there, and I don't dare to go past it. When I've had the signal but can't make it, down the stairs or along the hall past the sitting room, the commander understands. He knows my situation none better. He knows all the rules. Sometimes, however, Serena Joy is out, visiting another commander's wife, a sick one. That's the only place she could conceivably go, by herself in the evenings. She takes food, a cake or pie or loaf of bread baked by Rita, or a jar of jelly, made from the mint leaves that grow in her garden. They get sick a lot, these wives of the commanders. It adds interest to their lives. As for us, the Handmaids and even the Marthas, we avoid illness. The Marthas don't want to be forced to retire, because who knows where they go. You don't see that many old women around anymore. And as for us, any real illness, anything lingering, weakening, a loss of flesh or appetite, a fall of hair, a failure of the glands would be terminal. I remember Cora, earlier in the spring, staggering around even though she had the flu, holding on to the door frames when she thought no one was looking, being careful not to cough. A slight cold, she said when Serena asked her. Serena herself sometimes takes a few days off, tucked up in bed. Then she's the one to get the company, the wives rustling up the stairs, clucking and cheerful. She gets the cakes and pies, the jelly, the bouquets of flowers from their gardens. They take turns. There is some sort of list, invisible, unspoken. Each is careful not to hog more than her share of the attention. On the nights when Serena is due to be out, I'm sure to be summoned. The first time I was confused. His needs were obscure to me, and what I could perceive of them seemed to me ridiculous, laughable, like a fetish for lace-up shoes. Also, there had been a letdown of sorts. What had I been expecting behind that closed door the first time? Something unspeakable, down on all fours perhaps, perversions, whips, mutilations? At the very least some minor sexual manipulation, some bygone peccadillo now denied him, prohibited by law and punishable by amputation. To be asked to play Scrabble instead, as if we were an old married couple or two children, seemed kinky in the extreme, a violation too in its own way. As a request it was opaque. So when I left the room, it still wasn't clear to me what he wanted or why, or whether I could fulfill any of it for him. If there's to be a bargain, the terms of exchange must be set forth. This was something he certainly had not done. I thought he might be toying, some cat-and-a-mouse routine, but now I think that his motives and desires weren't obvious even to him. They had not yet reached the level of words. The second evening began in the same way as the first. I went to the door, which was closed, knocked on it, was told to come in. Then followed the same two games with the smooth beige counters. Prolix, quartz, quandary, sylph, rhythm, all the old tricks with consonants I could dream up or remember. My tongue felt thick with the effort of spelling. It was like using a language I'd once known but had nearly forgotten, a language having to do with customs that had long before passed out of the world. Café au lait at an outdoor table with a brioche, absinthe in a tall glass, or shrimp in a cornucopia of newspaper. Things I'd once read about but had never seen. It was like trying to walk without crutches, like those phony scenes in old TV movies. You can do it. I know you can. That was the way my mind lurched and stumbled, among the sharp R's and T's, sliding over the ovoid vowels as if on pebbles. The commander was patient when I hesitated, or asked him for a correct spelling. We can always look it up in the dictionary, he said. He said we. The first time I realized he'd let me win. That night I was expecting everything to be the same, including the goodnight kiss. But when we'd finished the second game, he sat back in his chair. He placed his elbows on the arms of the chair, the tips of his fingers together, and looked at me. I have a little present for you, he said. He smiled a little. Then he pulled open the top drawer of his desk and took something out. He held it a moment, casually enough, between thumb and finger, as if deciding whether or not to give it to me. Although it was upside down from where I was sitting, I recognized it. They were once common enough. It was a magazine, a women's magazine it looked like from the picture. A model on glossy paper, hair blown, neck scarfed, mouth lipsticked. The fall fashions. I thought such magazines had all been destroyed, but here was one left over in a commander's private study, where you'd least expect to find such a thing. He looked down at the model, who was right side up to him. He was still smiling, that wistful smile of his. It was a look you'd give to an almost extinct animal at the zoo. Staring at the magazine as he dangled it before me like fish bait, I wanted it. I wanted it with a force that made the ends of my fingers ache. At the same time, I saw this longing of mine as trivial and absurd, because I'd taken such magazines lightly enough once. I'd read them in dentists' offices and sometimes on planes. I'd bought them to take to hotel rooms, a device to fill in empty time while I was waiting for Luke. After I'd leafed through them, I would throw them away, for they were infinitely discardable, and a day or two later I wouldn't be able to remember what had been in them. Though I remembered now. What was in them was promise. They dealt in transformations. They suggested an endless series of possibilities, extending like the reflections in two mirrors set facing one another, stretching on, replica after replica, to the vanishing point. They suggested one adventure after another, one wardrobe after another, one improvement after another, one man after another. They suggested rejuvenation, pain overcome and transcended, endless love. The real promise in them was immortality. This was what he was holding without knowing it. He riffled the pages. I felt myself leaning forward. It's an old one, he said, a curio of sorts. From the 70s, I think. A Vogue. This like a wine connoisseur dropping a name. I thought you might like to look at it. I hung back. He might be testing me to see how deep my indoctrination had really gone. It's not permitted, I said. In here it is, he said quietly. I saw the point. Having broken the main taboo, why should I hesitate over another one, something minor? Or another? Who could tell where it might stop? Behind this particular door, taboo dissolved. I took the magazine from him and turned it the right way round. There they were again, the images of my childhood. Bold, striding, confident, their arms flung out as if to claim space, their legs apart, feet planted squarely on the earth. There was something Renaissance about the pose, but it was princes I thought of, not coiffed and ringlet maidens. Those candid eyes, shadowed with makeup, yes, but like the eyes of cats, fixed for the pounce. No quailing, no clinging there, not in those capes and rough tweeds, those boots that came to the knee. Pirates, these women, with their ladle-like briefcases for the loot and their horsey, acquisitive teeth. I felt the commander watching me as I turned the pages. I knew I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing, and that he found pleasure in seeing me do it. I should have felt evil. By Aunt Lydia's lights, I was evil. But I didn't feel evil. Instead, I felt like an old Edwardian seaside postcard. Naughty. What was he going to give me next? A girdle? Why do you have this? I asked him. Some of us, he said, retain an appreciation for the old things. But these were supposed to have been burned, I said. There were house-to-house searches, bonfires. What's dangerous in the hands of the multitudes, he said, with what may or may not have been irony, is safe enough for those whose motives are beyond reproach, I said. He nodded gravely. Impossible to tell whether or not he meant it. But why show it to me? I said, and then felt stupid. What could he possibly say? That he was amusing himself at my expense? For he must have known how painful it was to me to be reminded of the former time. I wasn't prepared for what he actually did say. Who else could I show it to? He said, and there it was again, that sadness. Should I go further? I thought. I didn't want to push him too far, too fast. I knew I was dispensable. Nevertheless, I said, too softly, how about your wife? He seemed to think about that. No, he said, she wouldn't understand. Anyway, she won't talk to me much anymore. We don't seem to have much in common these days. So there it was, out in the open. His wife didn't understand him. That's what I was there for, then. The same old thing. It was too banal to be true. On the third night, I asked him for some hand lotion. I didn't want to sound begging, but I wanted what I could get. Somewhat, he said, courteous as ever. He was across the desk from me. He didn't touch me much, except for that one obligatory kiss. No pawing, no heavy breathing, none of that. It would have been out of place, somehow, for him as well as for me. Hand lotion, I said, or face lotion. Our skin gets very dry. For some reason I said our instead of my. I would have liked to ask also for some bath oil, in those little colored globules you used to be able to get, that were so much like magic to me when they existed in the round glass bowl in my mother's bathroom at home. But I thought he wouldn't know what they were. Anyway, they probably weren't made any more. Dry? The commander said, as if he'd never thought about that before. What do you do about it? We use butter, I said, when we can get it. Or margarine. A lot of the time it's margarine. Butter, he said, musing. That's very clever. Butter. He laughed. I could have slapped him. I think I could get some of that, he said, as if indulging a child's wish for bubble gum. But she might smell it on you. I wondered if this fear of his came from past experience. Long past. Lipstick on the collar, perfume on the cuffs, a scene, late at night, in some kitchen or bedroom. A man devoid of such experience wouldn't think of that, unless he's craftier than he looks. I'd be careful, I said. Besides, she's never that close to me. Sometimes she is, he said. I looked down. I'd forgotten about that. I could feel myself blushing. I won't use it on those nights, I said. On the fourth evening, he gave me the hand lotion, in an unlabeled plastic bottle. It wasn't very good quality. It smelled faintly of vegetable oil. No lily of the valley for me. It may have been something they made up for use in hospitals on bedsores. But I thanked him anyway. The trouble is, I said, I don't have anywhere to keep it. In your room, he said, as if it were obvious. They'd find it, I said. Someone would find it. Why? He asked, as if he really didn't know. Maybe he didn't. It wasn't the first time he gave evidence of being truly ignorant of the real conditions under which we lived. They look, I said. They look in all our rooms. What for? He said. I think I lost control then, a little. Razor blades, I said. Books, writing, black market stuff. All the things we aren't supposed to have. Jesus Christ, you ought to know. My voice was angrier than I'd intended. But he didn't even wince. Then you'll have to keep it here, he said. So that's what I did. He watched me smoothing it over my hands and then my face with that same air of looking in through the bars. I wanted to turn my back on him. It was as if he were in the bathroom with me. But I didn't dare. For him, I must remember, I am only a whim. Chapter 26. When the night for the ceremony came round again, 2 or 3 weeks later, I found that things were changed. There was an awkwardness now that there hadn't been before. Before, I treated it as a job, an unpleasant job to be gone through as fast as possible so it could be over with. Steel yourself, my mother used to say. Before examinations, I didn't want to take or swims in cold water. I never thought much at the time about what the phrase meant, but it had something to do with metal, with armor, and that's what I would do. I would steel myself. I would pretend not to be present, not in the flesh. This state of absence, of existing apart from the body, had been true of the commander too, I knew now. Probably he thought about other things the whole time he was with me, with us, for of course Serena Joy was there on those evenings also. He might have been thinking about what he did during the day, or about playing golf, or about what he'd had for dinner. The sexual act, although he performed it in a perfunctory way, must have been largely unconscious, for him, like scratching himself. But that night, the first since the beginning of whatever this new arrangement was between us, I had no name for it. I felt shy of him. I felt, for one thing, that he was actually looking at me and I didn't like it. The lights were on, as usual, since Serena Joy always avoided anything that would have created an aura of romance or eroticism, however slight. Overhead lights, harsh despite the canopy. It was like being on an operating table in the full glare, like being on a stage. I was conscious that my legs were hairy, in the straggly way of legs that have once been shaved but have grown back. I was conscious of my armpits too, although of course he couldn't see them. I felt uncouth. This act of copulation, fertilization perhaps, which should have been no more to me than a bee is to a flower, had become for me indecorous, an embarrassing breach of propriety, which it hadn't been before. He was no longer a thing to me. That was the problem. I realized it that night, and the realization has stayed with me. Complicates. Serena Joy had changed for me, too. Once I'd merely hated her, for her part in what was being done to me, and because she hated me too and resented my presence, and because she would be the one to raise my child, should I be able to have one after all. But now, although I still hated her, no more so than when she was gripping my hands so hard that her rings bit my flesh, pulling my hands back as well, which she must have done on purpose to make me as uncomfortable as she could, the hatred was no longer pure and simple. Partly I was jealous of her. But how could I be jealous of a woman so obviously dried up and unhappy? You can only be jealous of someone who has something you think you ought to have yourself. Nevertheless, I was jealous. But I also felt guilty about her. I felt I was an intruder in a territory that ought to have been hers. Now that I was seeing the commander on the sly, if only to play his games and listen to him talk, our functions were no longer as separate as they should have been in theory. I was taking something away from her, although she didn't know it. I was filching. Never mind that it was something she apparently didn't want or had no use for, had rejected even. Still, it was hers, and if I took it away, this mysterious it I couldn't quite define, for the commander wasn't in love with me, I refused to believe he felt anything for me as extreme as that. What would be left for her? Why should I care? I told myself. She's nothing to me, she dislikes me. She'd have me out of the house in a minute, or worse, if she could think up any excuse at all. If she were to find out, for instance. He wouldn't be able to intervene to save me. The transgressions of women in the household, whether Martha or Handmaid, are supposed to be under the jurisdiction of the wives alone. She was a malicious and vengeful woman. I knew that. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake it, that small compunction towards her. Also, I now had power over her of a kind, although she didn't know it. And I enjoyed that. Why pretend? I enjoyed it a lot. But the commander could give me away so easily. By a look, by a gesture. Some tiny slip that would reveal to anyone watching that there was something between us now. He almost did it the night of the ceremony. He reached his hand up as if to touch my face. I moved my head to the side, to warn him away, hoping Serena Joy hadn't noticed, and he withdrew his hand again, withdrew into himself and his single-minded journey. "Don't do that again," I said to him the next time we were alone. "Do what?" he said. "Try to touch me like that when she's there." "Did I?" he said. "You could get me transferred," I said. "To the colonies. You know that. Or worse." I thought he should continue to act, in public, as if I were a large vase or a window. Part of the background, inanimate or transparent. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to, but I find it—" "What?" I said when he didn't go on. "Impersonal," he said. "How long did it take you to find that out?" I said. You can see from the way I was speaking to him that we were already on different terms. For the generations that come after, Aunt Lydia said, it will be so much better. The women will live in harmony together, all in one family. You will be like daughters to them, and when the population level is up to scratch again, we'll no longer have to transfer you from one house to another because there will be enough to go round. There can be bonds of real affection, she said, blinking at us ingratiatingly, under such conditions. Women united for a common end, helping one another in their daily chores as they walk the path of life together, each performing her appointed task. Why expect one woman to carry out all the functions necessary to the serene running of a household? It isn't reasonable or humane. Your daughters will have greater freedom. We are working towards the goal of a little garden for each one of you, the clasped hands again, the breathy voice, and that's just one for instance. The raised finger wagging at us. But we can't be greedy pigs and demand too much before it's ready. Now can we? The fact is that I'm his mistress. Men at the top have always had mistresses. Why should things be any different now? The arrangements aren't quite the same, granted. The mistress used to be kept in a minor house or apartment of her own, and now they've amalgamated things. But underneath it's the same. More or less. Outside woman they used to be called in some countries. I am the outside woman. It's my job to provide what is otherwise lacking. Even the Scrabble. It's an absurd as well as an ignominious position. Sometimes I think she knows. Sometimes I think they're in collusion. Sometimes I think she put him up to it and is laughing at me. As I laugh from time to time and with irony at myself, let her take the weight she can say to herself. Maybe she's withdrawn from him almost completely. Maybe that's her version of freedom. But even so, and stupidly enough, I'm happier than I was before. Something to do, for one thing. Something to fill the time at night instead of sitting alone in my room. Something else to think about. I don't love the commander or anything like it, but he's of interest to me. He occupies space. He is more than a shadow. And I for him. To him, I'm no longer merely a usable body. To him, I'm not just a boat with no cargo, a chalice with no wine in it, an oven, to be crude, minus the bun. To him, I am not merely empty. Chapter 27. I walk with Offred along the summer street. It's warm, humid. This would have been sundress and sandals weather once. In each of our baskets are strawberries. The strawberries are in season now, so we'll eat them and eat them until we're sick of them. And some wrapped fish. We got the fish at Loaves and Fishes, with its wooden sign, a fish with a smile and eyelashes. It doesn't sell loaves, though. Most households bake their own, though you can get dried-up rolls and wizened donuts at Daily Bread, if you run short. Loaves and Fishes is hardly ever open. Why bother opening when there's nothing to sell? The sea fisheries were defunct several years ago. The few fish they have now are from fish farms and taste muddy. The news says the coastal areas are being wrested. Sole, I remember, and haddock, swordfish, scallops, tuna, lobsters stuffed and baked, salmon, pink and fat, grilled in steaks. Could they all be extinct like the whales? I've heard that rumor, passed on to me in soundless words, the lips hardly moving, as we stood in line outside, waiting for the store to open, lured by the picture of succulent white fillets in the window. They put the picture in the window when they have something, take it away when they don't. Sign language. Offred and I walk slowly today. We are hot in our long dresses, wet under the arms, tired. At least in this heat we don't wear gloves. There used to be an ice cream store somewhere in this block. I can't remember the name. Things can change so quickly. Buildings can be torn down or turned into something else. It's hard to keep them straight in your mind the way they used to be. You could get double scoops, and if you wanted they would put chocolate sprinkles on the top. These had the name of a man. Johnny's? Jackie's? I can't remember. We would go there when she was little, and I'd hold her up so she could see through the glass side of the counter, where the vats of ice cream were on display, colored so delicately, pale orange, pale green, pale pink, and I'd read the names to her so she could choose. She wouldn't choose by the name, though, but by the color. Her dresses and overalls were those colors, too. Ice cream pastels. Jimmy's, that was the name. Offred and I are more comfortable with one another now. We're used to each other. Siamese twins. We don't bother much with the formalities anymore when we greet each other. We smile and move off, in tandem, traveling smoothly along our daily track. Now and again we vary the route. There's nothing against it as long as we stay within the barriers. A rat in a maze is free to go anywhere as long as it stays inside the maze. We've been to the stores already and the church. Now we're at the wall. Nothing on it today. They don't leave the bodies hanging as long in summer as they do in winter. because of the flies and the smell. This was once the land of air sprays, pine and floral, and people retain the taste. Especially the commanders, who preach purity in all things. You have everything on your list? Offred says to me now, though she knows I do. Our lists are never long. She's given up some of her passivity lately, some of her melancholy. Often she speaks to me first. Yes, I say. Let's go around, she says. She means down towards the river. We haven't been that way for a while. Fine, I say. I don't turn at once, though, but remain standing where I am, taking a last look at the wall. There are the red bricks, there are the searchlights, there's the barbed wire, there are the hooks. Somehow the wall is even more foreboding when it's empty like this. When there's someone hanging on it, at least you know the worst. But vacant, it is also potential, like a storm approaching. When I can see the bodies, the actual bodies, when I can guess from the sizes and shapes that none of them is Luke, I can believe also that he is still alive. I don't know why I expect him to appear on this wall. There are hundreds of other places they could have killed him. But I can't shake the idea that he's in there, at this moment, behind the blank red bricks. I try to imagine which building he's in. I can remember where the buildings are, inside the wall. We used to be able to walk freely there when it was a university. We still go in there once in a while, for women's salvagings. Most of the buildings are red brick too. Some have arched doorways, a Romanesque effect, from the 19th century. We aren't allowed inside the buildings anymore. But who would want to go in? Those buildings belong to the eyes. Maybe he's in the library, somewhere in the vaults, the stacks. The library is like a temple. There's a long flight of white steps, leading to the rank of doors. Then, inside, another white staircase going up. To either side of it, on the wall, there are angels. Also there are men fighting, or about to fight, looking clean and noble, not dirty and blood-stained and smelly the way they must have looked. Victory is on one side of the inner doorway, leading them on, and death is on the other. It's a mural in honor of some war or other. The men on the side of death are still alive. They're going to heaven. Death is a beautiful woman, with wings and one breast almost bare? Or is that victory? I can't remember. They won't have destroyed that. We turn our backs to the wall, head left. Here there are several empty storefronts, their glass windows scrawled with soap. I try to remember what was sold in them once. Cosmetics? Jewelry? Most of the stores carrying things for men are still open. It's just the ones dealing in what they call vanities that have been shut down. At the corner is the store known as Soul Scrolls. It's a franchise. There are Soul Scrolls in every city center, in every suburb, or so they say. It must make a lot of profit. The window of Soul Scrolls is shatterproof. Behind it are printout machines, row on row of them. These machines are known as holy rollers, but only among us it's a disrespectful nickname. What the machines print is prayers. Roll upon roll, prayers going out endlessly. They're ordered by CompuPhone. I've overheard the commander's wife doing it. Ordering prayers from Soul Scrolls is supposed to be a sign of piety and faithfulness to the regime, so of course the commander's wives do it a lot. It helps their husbands' careers. There are 5 different prayers. For health, wealth, a death, a birth, a sin. You pick the one you want, punch in the number, then punch in your own number so your account will be debited, and punch in the number of times you want the prayer repeated. The machines talk as they print out the prayers. If you like, you can go inside and listen to them, the toneless metallic voices repeating the same thing over and over. Once the prayers have been printed out and said, the paper rolls back through another slot and is recycled into fresh paper again. There are no people inside the building. The machines run by themselves. You can't hear the voices from outside. Only a murmur, a hum, like a devout crowd on its knees. Each machine has an eye painted in gold on the side, flanked by 2 small golden wings. I try to remember what this place sold when it was a store, before it was turned into Soul Scrolls. I think it was lingerie. Pink and silver boxes, colored pantyhose, brassieres with lace, silk scarves. Something lost. Offglin and I stand outside Soul Scrolls, looking through the shatterproof windows, watching the prayers well out from the machines and disappear again through the slot, back to the realm of the unsaid. Now I shift my gaze. What I see is not the machines, but Offglin, reflected in the glass of the window. She's looking straight at me. We can see into each other's eyes. This is the first time I've ever seen Offglin's eyes. Directly, steadily, not aslant. Her face is oval pink, plump but not fat, her eyes roundish. She holds my stare in the glass, level, unwavering. Now it's hard to look away. There's a shock in this seeing. It's like seeing somebody naked, for the first time. There is risk suddenly in the air between us, where there was none before. Even this meeting of eyes holds danger. Though there's nobody near, at last Offglin speaks. Do you think God listens, she says, to these machines? She is whispering, our habit at the center. In the past this would have been a trivial enough remark, a kind of scholarly speculation. Right now it's treason. I could scream. I could run away. I could turn from her silently, to show her I won't tolerate this kind of talk in my presence. Subversion, sedition, blasphemy, heresy, all rolled into one. I steel myself. No, I say. She lets out her breath, in a long sigh of relief. We have crossed the invisible line together. Neither do I, she says. Though I suppose it's faith of a kind, I say. Like Tibetan prayer wheels. What are those? She asks. I only read about them, I say. They were moved around by the wind. They're all gone now. Like everything, she says. Only now do we stop looking at one another. Is it safe here? I whisper. I figure it's the safest place, she says. We look like we're praying is all. What about them? Them, she says, still whispering. You're always safest out of doors, no mics, and why would they put one here? They'd think nobody would dare. But we've stayed long enough. There's no sense in being late getting back. We turn away together. Keep your head down as we walk, she says, and lean just a little towards me. That way I can hear you better. Don't talk when there's anyone coming. We walk, heads bent as usual. I'm so excited I can hardly breathe, but I keep a steady pace. Now more than ever I must avoid drawing attention to myself. I thought you were a true believer, Offglin says. I thought you were, I say. You were always so stinking pious. So were you, I reply. I want to laugh, shout, hug her. You can join us, she says. Us, I say. There is an us, then, there's a we. I knew it. You didn't think I was the only one, she says. I didn't think that. It occurs to me that she may be a spy, a plant set to trap me. Such is the soil in which we grow. But I can't believe it. Hope is rising in me, like sap in a tree, blood in a wound. We have made an opening. I want to ask her if she's seen Moira, if anyone can find out what's happened, to Luke, to my child, my mother even, but there's not much time. Too soon we're approaching the corner of the main street, the one before the first barrier. There will be too many people. Don't say a word, Offglin warns me, though she doesn't need to. In any way. Of course I won't, I say. Who could I tell? We walk the main street in silence, past lilies, past all flesh. There are more people on the sidewalks this afternoon than usual. The warm weather must have brought them out. Women in green, blue, red stripes. Men too, some in uniform, some only in civilian suits. The sun is free, it is still there to be enjoyed. Though no one bathes in it anymore, not in public. There are more cars too, whirlwinds with their chauffeurs and their cushioned occupants. Lesser cars driven by lesser men. Something is happening. There's a commotion, a flurry among the shoals of cars. Some are pulling over to the side, as if to get out of the way. I look up quickly. It's a black van, with the white-winged eye on the side. It doesn't have the siren on, but the other cars avoid it anyway. It cruises slowly along the street, as if looking for something. Shark on the prowl. I freeze, cold travels through me, down to my feet. There must have been microphones, they've heard us after all. Offred, under cover of her sleeve, grips my elbow. Keep moving, she whispers. Pretend not to see, but I can't help seeing. Right in front of us the van pulls up. Two eyes, in gray suits, leap from the opening double doors at the back. They grab a man who is walking along, a man with a briefcase, an ordinary-looking man, slam him back against the black side of the van. He's there a moment, splayed out against the metal as if stuck to it. Then one of the eyes moves in on him, does something sharp and brutal that doubles him over into a limp cloth bundle. They pick him up and heave him into the back of the van like a sack of mail. Then they are inside also and the doors are closed and the van moves on. It's over, in seconds, and the traffic on the street resumes as if nothing has happened. What I feel is relief. It wasn't me. Chapter 28. I don't feel like a nap this afternoon. There's still too much adrenaline. I sit on the window seat, looking out through the semi-sheer of the curtains. White nightgown. The window is as open as it goes. There's a breeze, hot in the sunlight, and the white cloth blows across my face. From the outside I must look like a cocoon, a spook, face enshrouded like this, only the outlines visible of nose, bandaged mouth, blind eyes. But I like the sensation, the soft cloth brushing my skin. It's like being in a cloud. They've given me a small electric fan, which helps in this humidity. It whirs on the floor, in the corner, its blades encased in grill work. If I were Moira, I'd know how to take it apart, reduce it to its cutting edges. I have no screwdriver, but if I were Moira, I could do it without a screwdriver. I'm not Moira. What would she tell me about the commander if she were here? Probably she'd disapprove. She disapproved of Luke back then. Not of Luke, but of the fact that he was married. She said I was poaching on another woman's ground. I said Luke wasn't a fish or a piece of dirt either. He was a human being and could make his own decisions. She said I was rationalizing. I said I was in love. She said that was no excuse. Moira was always more logical than I am. I said she didn't have that problem herself anymore, since she'd decided to prefer women, and as far as I could see she had no scruples about stealing them or borrowing them when she felt like it. She said it was different, because the balance of power was equal between women, so sex was an even-Steven transaction. I said even Steven was a sexist phrase if she was going to be like that, and anyway that argument was outdated. She said I had trivialized the issue, and if I thought it was outdated I was living with my head in the sand. We said all this in my kitchen, drinking coffee, sitting at my kitchen table in those low, intense voices we used for such arguments when we were in our early 20s. A carryover from college. The kitchen was in a rundown apartment in a clapboard house near the river, the kind with 3 stories and a rickety outside back staircase. I had the second floor, which meant I got noise from both above and below. 2 unwanted stereo disc players thumping late into the night. Students, I knew. I was still on my first job, which didn't pay much. I worked a computer in an insurance company. So the hotels with Luke didn't mean only love or even only sex to me. They also meant time off from the cockroaches, the dripping sink, the linoleum that was peeling off the floor in patches, even from my own attempts to brighten things up by sticking posters on the wall and hanging prisms in the windows. I had plants, too, though they always got spider mites or died from being unwatered. I would go off with Luke and neglect them. I said there was more than one way of living with your head in the sand, and that if Moira thought she could create utopia by shutting herself up in a women-only enclave, she was sadly mistaken. Men were not just going to go away, I said. You couldn't just ignore them. That's like saying you should go out and catch syphilis merely because it exists, Moira said. Are you calling Luke a social disease? I said. Moira laughed. Listen to us, she said. Shit, we sound like your mother. We both laughed then, and when she left we hugged each other as usual. There was a time when we didn't hug, after she told me about being gay. But then she said I didn't turn her on, reassuring me, and we'd gone back to it. We could fight and wrangle and name-call, but it didn't change anything underneath. She was still my oldest friend. I got a better apartment after that, where I lived for the 2 years it took Luke to pry himself loose. I paid for it myself with my new job. It was in a library, not the big one with Death and Victory, a smaller one. I worked transferring books to computer disks, to cut down on storage space and replacement costs, they said. Discers, we called ourselves. We called the library a discotheque, which was a joke of ours. After the books were transferred, they were supposed to go to the shredder. But sometimes I took them home with me. I liked the feel of them and the look. Luke said I had the mind of an antiquarian. He liked that, he liked old things himself. It's strange now to think about having a job. Job. It's a funny word. It's a job for a man. Do a jobby, they'd say to children when they were being toilet trained. Or of dogs, he did a job on the carpet. You were supposed to hit them with rolled-up newspapers, my mother said. I can remember when there were newspapers, though I never had a dog, only cats. The book of job. All those women having jobs. Hard to imagine now, but thousands of them had jobs, millions. It was considered the normal thing. Now it's like remembering the paper money, when they still had that. My mother kept some of it, pasted into her scrapbook along with the early photos. It was obsolete by then, you couldn't buy anything with it. Pieces of paper, thickish, greasy to the touch, green-colored, with pictures on each side. Some old man in a wig, and on the other side a pyramid with an eye above it. It said, "In God we trust." My mother said people used to have signs beside their cash registers, for a joke. "In God we trust, all others pay cash." That would be blasphemy now. You had to take those pieces of paper with you when you went shopping, though by the time I was 9 or 10 most people used plastic cards. Not for the groceries though, that came later. It seems so primitive, totemistic, even like cowrie shells. I must have used that kind of money myself a little before everything went on the CompuBank. I guess that's how they were able to do it in the way they did all at once without anyone knowing beforehand. If there had still been portable money, it would have been more difficult. It was after the catastrophe, when they shot the president and machine-gunned the Congress and the army declared a state of emergency. They blamed it on the Islamic fanatics at the time. "Keep calm," they said on television. "Everything is under control." I was stunned. Everyone was, I know that. It was hard to believe. The entire government gone like that. How did they get in? How did it happen? That was when they suspended the Constitution. They said it would be temporary. There wasn't even any rioting in the streets. People stayed home at night, watching television, looking for some direction. There wasn't even an enemy you could put your finger on. "Look out," said Moira to me over the phone. "Here it comes." "Hear what comes?" I said. "You wait," she said. "They've been building up to this. It's you and me up against the wall, baby." She was quoting an expression of my mother's, but she wasn't intending to be funny. Things continued in that state of suspended animation for weeks, although some things did happen. Newspapers were censored and some were closed down, for security reasons, they said. The roadblocks began to appear and identipasses. Everyone approved of that since it was obvious you couldn't be too careful. They said that new elections would be held, but that it would take some time to prepare for them. The thing to do, they said, was to continue on as usual. The pornomarts were shut, though, and there were no longer any Feels on Wheels vans and bundly buggies circling the square. But I wasn't sad to see them go. We all knew what a nuisance they'd been. "It's high time somebody did something," said the woman behind the counter, at the store where I usually bought my cigarettes. It was on the corner, a newsstand chain. Papers, candy, cigarettes. The woman was older, with gray hair. My mother's generation. Did they just close them or what? I asked. She shrugged. Who knows, who cares, she said. Maybe they just moved them off somewhere else. Trying to get rid of it altogether is like trying to stamp out mice, you know? She punched my CompuNumber into the till, barely looking at it. I was a regular by then. People were complaining, she said. The next morning, on my way to the library for the day, I stopped by the same store for another pack, because I'd run out. I was smoking more those days. It was the tension, you could feel it like a subterranean hum, although things seemed so quiet. I was drinking more coffee too, and having trouble sleeping. Everyone was a little jumpy. There was a lot more music on the radio than usual and fewer words. It was after we'd been married, for years it seemed. She was 3 or 4 in daycare. We'd all got up in the usual way and had breakfast, granola, I remember, and Luke had driven her off to school, in the little outfit I'd bought her just a couple of weeks before, striped overalls and a blue t-shirt. What month was this? It must have been September. There was a school pool that was supposed to pick them up, but for some reason I'd wanted Luke to do it. I was getting worried even about the school pool. No children walked to school anymore. There had been too many disappearances. When I got to the corner store, the usual woman wasn't there. Instead, there was a man, a young man. He couldn't have been more than 20. She sick? I said as I handed him my card. Who? He said, aggressively, I thought. The woman who's usually here, I said. How would I know, he said. He was punching my number in, studying each number, punching with one finger. He obviously hadn't done it before. I drummed my fingers on the counter, impatient for a cigarette, wondering if anyone had ever told him something could be done about those pimples on his neck. I remember quite clearly what he looked like. Tall, slightly stooped, dark hair cut short, brown eyes that seemed to focus 2 inches behind the bridge of my nose, and that acne. I suppose I remember him so clearly because of what he said next. Sorry, he said. This number's not valid. That's ridiculous, I said. It must be. I've got thousands in my account. I just got the statement 2 days ago. Try it again. It's not valid, he repeated obstinately. See that red light? Means it's not valid. You must have made a mistake, I said. Try it again. He shrugged and gave me a fed-up smile, but he did try the number again. This time I watched his fingers on each number and checked the numbers that came up in the window. It was my number all right, but there was the red light again. See? He said again, still with that smile, as if he knew some private joke he wasn't going to tell me. I'll phone them from the office, I said. The system had fouled up before, but a few phone calls usually straightened it out. Still, I was angry, as if I'd been unjustly accused of something I didn't even know about, as if I'd made the mistake myself. You do that, he said indifferently. I left the cigarettes on the counter, since I hadn't paid for them. I figured I could borrow some at work. I did phone from the office, but all I got was a recording. The lines were overloaded, the recording said. Could I please phone back? The lines stayed overloaded all morning, as far as I could tell. I phoned back several times, but no luck. Even that wasn't too unusual. About 2 o'clock after lunch, the director came in to the disking room. I have something to tell you, he said. He looked terrible. His hair was untidy. His eyes were pink and wobbling, as though he'd been drinking. We all looked up, turned off our machines. There must have been 8 or 10 of us in the room. I'm sorry, he said, but it's the law. I really am sorry. For what? Somebody said. I have to let you go, he said. It's the law, I have to let you all go. He said this almost gently, as if we were wild animals, frogs he'd caught in a jar, as if he were being humane. We're being fired? I said. I stood up. But why? Not fired, he said. Let go. You can't work here anymore. It's the law. He ran his hands through his hair and I thought, he's gone crazy. The strain has been too much for him and he's blown his wiring. You can't just do that, said the woman who sat next to me. This sounded false, improbable, like something you would say on television. It isn't me, he said. You don't understand. Please go now. His voice was rising. I don't want any trouble. If there's trouble, the books might be lost. Things will get broken. He looked over his shoulder. They're outside, he said, in my office. If you don't go now, they'll come in themselves. They gave me 10 minutes. By now, he sounded crazier than ever. He's loopy, someone said out loud, which we must all have thought. But I could see out into the corridor, and there were 2 men standing there in uniforms with machine guns. This was too theatrical to be true. Yet there they were. Sudden apparitions like Martians. There was a dreamlike quality to them. They were too vivid, too at odds with their surroundings. Just leave the machines, he said while we were getting our things together, filing out. As if we could have taken them. We stood in a cluster on the steps outside the library. We didn't know what to say to one another. Since none of us understood what had happened, there was nothing much we could say. We looked at one another's faces and saw dismay, and a certain shame, as if we'd been caught doing something we shouldn't. It's outrageous, one woman said, but without belief. What was it about this that made us feel we deserved it? When I got back to the house, nobody was there. Luke was still at work, my daughter was at school. I felt tired, bone tired, but when I sat down I got up again. I couldn't seem to sit still. I wandered through the house, from room to room. I remember touching things, not even that consciously, just placing my fingers on them. Things like the toaster, the sugar bowl, the ashtray in the living room. After a while, I picked up the cat and carried her around with me. I wanted Luke to come home. I thought I should do something, take steps, but I didn't know what steps I could take. I tried phoning the bank again, but I only got the same recording. I poured myself a glass of milk. I told myself I was too jittery for another coffee, and went into the living room and sat down on the sofa and put the glass of milk on the coffee table, carefully, without drinking any of it. I held the cat up against my chest so I could feel her purring against my throat. After a while, I phoned my mother at her apartment, but there was no answer. She'd settled down more by then. She'd stopped moving every few years. She lived across the river in Boston. I waited a while and phoned Moira. She wasn't there either, but when I tried half an hour later, she was in. In between those phone calls, I just sat on the sofa. What I thought about was my daughter's school lunches. I thought maybe I'd been giving her too many peanut butter sandwiches. I've been fired, I told Moira when I got her on the phone. She said she would come over. By that time, she was working for a women's collective, the publishing division. They put out books on birth control and rape and things like that, though there wasn't as much demand for those things as there used to be. I'll come over, she said. She must have been able to tell from my voice that this was what I wanted. She got there after some time. So, she said. She threw off her jacket, sprawled into the oversized chair. Tell me. First we'll have a drink. She got up and went to the kitchen and poured us a couple of scotches, and came back and sat down, and I tried to tell her what had happened to me. When I'd finished, she said, "Tried getting anything on your CompuCard today?" "Yes," I said. I told her about that too. "They've frozen them," she said. "Mine too. The collectives too. Any account with an F on it instead of an M. All they needed to do is push a few buttons. We're cut off. But I've got over $2,000 in the bank," I said, as if my own account was the only one that mattered. "Women can't hold property anymore," she said. "It's a new law. Turned on the TV today?" "No," I said. "It's on there," she said. "All over the place." She was not stunned, the way I was. In some strange way she was gleeful, as if this was what she'd been expecting for some time, and now she'd been proven right. She even looked more energetic, more determined. "Luke can use your CompuCount for you," she said. "They'll transfer your number to him, or that's what they say. Husband or male next of kin." "But what about you?" I said. She didn't have anyone. I'll go underground, she said. Some of the gays can take over our numbers and buy us things we need. But why? I said. Why did they? Ours is not to reason why, said Moira. They had to do it that way, the comp-counts and the jobs both at once. Can you picture the airports otherwise? They don't want us going anywhere, you can bet on that. I went to pick my daughter up from school. I drove with exaggerated care. By the time Luke got home, I was sitting at the kitchen table. She was drawing with felt pens at her own little table in the corner, where her paintings were taped up next to the refrigerator. Luke knelt beside me and put his arms around me. I heard, he said, on the car radio driving home. Don't worry, I'm sure it's temporary. Did they say why? I said. He didn't answer that. We'll get through it, he said, hugging me. You don't know what it's like, I said. I feel as if somebody cut off my feet. I wasn't crying. Also, I couldn't put my arms around him. It's only a job, he said, trying to soothe me. I guess you get all my money, I said. And I'm not even dead. I was trying for a joke, but it came out sounding macabre. Hush, he said. He was still kneeling on the floor. You know, I'll always take care of you. I thought, already he's starting to patronize me. Then I thought, already you're starting to get paranoid. I know, I said. I love you. Later, after she was in bed and we were having supper, and I wasn't feeling so shaky, I told him about the afternoon. I described the director coming in, blurting out his announcement. It would have been funny if it wasn't so awful, I said. I thought he was drunk. Maybe he was. The army was there and everything. Then I remembered something I'd seen and hadn't noticed at the time. It wasn't the army. It was some other army. There were marches, of course, a lot of women and some men. But they were smaller than you might have thought. I guess people were scared. And when it was known that the police or the army or whoever they were would open fire almost as soon as any of the marches even started, the marches stopped. A few things were blown up, post offices, subway stations. But you couldn't even be sure who was doing it. It could have been the army to justify the computer searches and the other ones, the door-to-doors. I didn't go on any of the marches. Luke said it would be futile and I had to think about them, my family, him and her. I did think about my family. I started doing more housework, more baking. I tried not to cry at mealtimes. By this time I'd started to cry without warning and to sit beside the bedroom window staring out. I didn't know many of the neighbors, and when we met, outside on the street, we were careful to exchange nothing more than the ordinary greetings. Nobody wanted to be reported for disloyalty. Remembering this, I remember also my mother years before. I must have been 14, 15, that age when daughters are most embarrassed by their mothers. I remember her coming back to one of our many apartments with a group of other women, part of her ever-changing circle of friends. They'd been in a march that day. It was during the time of the porn riots, or was it the abortion riots? They were close together. There were a lot of bombings then. Clinics, video stores, it was hard to keep track. My mother had a bruise on her face and a little blood. You can't stick your hand through a glass window without getting cut, is what she said about it. Fucking pigs. Fucking bleeders, one of her friends said. They called the other side bleeders after the signs they carried. Let them bleed. So it must have been the abortion riots. I went into my bedroom to be out of their way. They were talking too much and too loudly. They ignored me, and I resented them. My mother and her rowdy friends. I didn't see why she had to dress that way in overalls as if she were young, or to swear so much. You're such a prude, she would say to me, in a tone of voice that was on the whole pleased. She liked being more outrageous than I was, more rebellious. Adolescents are always such prudes. Part of my disapproval was that, I'm sure, perfunctory routine. But also I wanted from her a life more ceremonious, less subject to makeshift and decampment. You were a wanted child, God knows, she would say at other moments, lingering over the photo albums in which she had me framed. These albums were thick with babies, but my replicas thinned out as I grew older, as if the population of my duplicates had been hit by some plague. She would say this a little regretfully, as though I hadn't turned out entirely as she'd expected. No mother is ever completely a child's idea of what a mother should be, and I suppose it works the other way around as well. But despite everything, we didn't do badly by one another, we did as well as most. I wish she were here so I could tell her I finally know this. Someone has come out of the house. I hear the distant closing of a door, around at the side, footsteps on the walk. It's Nick, I can see him now. He stepped off the path onto the lawn, to breathe in the humid air which stinks of flowers, of pulpy growth, of pollen thrown into the wind in handfuls, like oyster spawn into the sea. All this prodigal breeding. He stretches in the sun. I feel the ripple of muscles go along him, like a cat's back arching. He's in his shirt sleeves, bare arms sticking shamelessly out from the rolled cloth. Where does the tan end? I haven't spoken to him since that one night dreamscape in the moon-filled sitting room. He's only my flag, my semaphore. Body language. Right now his cap's on sideways. Therefore I am sent for. What does he get for it? His role as page boy. How does he feel pimping in this ambiguous way for the commander? Does it fill him with disgust or make him want more of me, want me more? Because he has no idea what really goes on in there among the books. Acts of perversion for all he knows. The commander and me, covering each other with ink, licking it off, or making love on stacks of forbidden newsprint. Well, he wouldn't be far off at that. But depend on it, there's something in it for him. Everyone's on the take one way or another. Extra cigarettes? Extra freedoms not allowed to the general run? Anyway, what can he prove? It's his word against the commander's, unless he wants to head a posse. Kick in the door, and what did I tell you? Caught in the act, sinfully scrabbling. Quick, eat those words. Maybe he just likes the satisfaction of knowing something secret, of having something on me, as they used to say. It's the kind of power you can use only once. I would like to think better of him. That night, after I'd lost my job, Luke wanted me to make love. Why didn't I want to? Desperation alone should have driven me. But I still felt numbed. I could hardly even feel his hands on me. What's the matter? He said. I don't know, I said. We still have, he said. But he didn't go on to say what we still had. It occurred to me that he shouldn't be saying we, since nothing that I knew of had been taken away from him. We still have each other, I said. It was true. Then why did I sound, even to myself, so indifferent? He kissed me then, as if now I'd said that, things could get back to normal. But something had shifted, some balance. I felt shrunken, so that when he put his arms around me, gathering me up, I was small as a doll. I felt love going forward without me. He doesn't mind this, I thought. He doesn't mind it at all. Maybe he even likes it. We are not each other's anymore. Instead, I am his. Unworthy, unjust, untrue. But that is what happened. So Luke, what I want to ask you now, what I need to know is, was I right? Because we never talked about it. By the time I could have done that, I was afraid to. I couldn't afford to lose you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you in these chapters? Leave a comment below and let's discuss. If you enjoyed this audiobook, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow book lovers. Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll dive deeper into Offred's story. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you in the next part.